ordinary, hard-working people, to use that old political cliche, and the powerful elite. I think that's part of why this has grabbed attention so much. As well as the fact, of course, that it's taken far, far too long for us to be really talking about this in the way that we now are. What else do you think is at play here? Why else do you think it's got people talking about this issue to the extent that it has? 0345 6060 973. Let's kick off our conversation with Paul Scully, a Conservative MP for Sutton and Cheam, who was the Postal Affairs Minister between 2020 and 2022. Paul, very good evening to you and good to have you on the programme. I know that you've been beavering away at this issue for quite some time when you were a minister. It's fair to say, though, isn't it, that this has only been thrust high up the political agenda because of that ITV programme. What does that fact say, do you think, about our political system?
Well, I think actually what it shows is democracy working, because government has been working on this, not just me, as you say. When I was Postal Affairs Minister, I'd made a number of urgent questions. I started the statutory inquiry. I started the compensation schemes, getting them started as well. This is the one issue in particular that I had sleepless nights over. I've sat there weeping at the drama that we saw and what that's done. Primarily because there's pictures there, there's videos there, people can really see the emotion and angst behind it. They've come and joined us as well. So what it does, it keeps it in the public eye, which is to be commended. More politicians are seeing this. The chamber was absolutely full yesterday, yet before Christmas, when we were talking about the exact same thing, it was next to empty.
That's the point I'm making, really. That's the point I'm making. Those MPs who couldn't be bothered to turn up a few weeks ago, suddenly they watch a few hours of TV on ITV and suddenly they're interested. I mean, it's not a great look, is it? It's not a great endorsement of what the political class has been doing on this, you and a small number of others aside.
I think it hammers it home to people because, what people always, unless you've got a constituent that's affected by this, it's one of those things that I think a lot of people knew something had happened with the post office. They didn't know the detail because it is quite technical, so it's something that might not have come across their radar. There's lots of competing interests. It's sort of like, how do you keep something salient? At the moment we're going through this horrendous situation in the Middle East, but what's happening in Israel and Gaza means that fewer people are talking about Ukraine, even fewer people are talking about Yemen, and even next to nobody are talking about the Rohingya and the civil war that's going on in Burma at the moment. All of these things are still going on, but you can only keep a few issues in your head as a salient issue at any one given time because of the news cycle, I suppose.
And when you were working this as a Post Office Minister, what sort of response were you getting from your colleagues in government? Was it an issue that was being taken very seriously, or were you having to fight pretty hard just to get attention for it?
I think it was trying to cut through the bureaucracy because, people are saying, well, why does it take so long to get the compensation out? And that's a fair question because, these are the people whose lives have been destroyed. I don't think we can do enough for them. They need life-changing amounts of money, not just a pittance. You're never going to restore their entire life. They're defined by this now. But you had people who may have thrown in the towel early before they were prosecuted, others who put their own money in to try and correct the situation, who just, in inverted commas, lost out financially. That's relatively easy to sort out, although Post Office had to find out who qualified for that. And then you could say, well, you've lost this, here's some money, we'll do a checking in, here's some money. You have people that have been convicted, Joe Hamilton, you have to quash those convictions because you just can't give out the laws, you can't give out compensation to a convicted criminal in inverted commas again. So you have to get that process done. And only 92 people out of the 700 plus have gone through that process because you have to do it yourself as an individual. And that's what the cabinet was announced getting Holland, the Postal Affairs Minister, who was announcing yesterday. They're trying to find a way of just doing a blanket quashing of all of those convictions so that we can get to compensation. And last bit, 555, led by Alan Bates, who had that court case that was at the end of the drama, where they were actually settled the deal. So that was a sort of court case that had been settled. So I had to then go to the Treasury and say, look, I need taxpayers' money and reopen that court case, which doesn't really have much of a precedent. So there was a lot of bureaucracy, a lot of checks, taxpayers' money, and all of those things added up to months and months and months of work and wait which adds up to despair, further despair for those postmasters whose lives have been wrecked.
So, quashing the convictions and then compensation, clearly the immediate priorities. What about accountability? What about justice, Paul? What should happen to the people who are found responsible for this outrage?
Yeah, well, you've got the order right. Get rid of the convictions, and then you can start going through those 700 to 900 people there with compensation. You restore people, the victims first. That's got to be priority, because these people are still suffering on a day-to-day basis, financially, some are being made bankrupt, etc. You then get to the questions. Now, the questions are being answered as we speak. Sir Williams is chairing. He's a retired judge. He's chairing the statutory inquiry that I set up. I originally made it non-statutory because when you make things statutory, as we've seen from the COVID inquiry, any number of inquiries, they take a long time. They're very costly with a lot of legal costs, and that's the last thing we want. Is that I'd rather give money to the victims than to lawyers, but we had to make it statutory because it is so technical. Those answers will come when Sir Williams comes up with his conclusions, and at that point, I think that's when we'll know who to hold accountable and how to do it. The police are already looking at what might happen in terms of fraud or perjury and those kind of things. The taxpayer should not be on the hook for all of the compensation. They should underwrite it. I think that's fair. Who should not be on the hook? Well, if you can show that there is a clear situation where Fujitsu, for example, were at fault, then they've got to look to themselves as well.
So Fujitsu should take the compensation.
Without back in. Well, I think they've definitely got questions to answer, and I've probably gone too far if I just said now I don't want to, step over the inquiry, but I think that's a clear, obvious avenue that we need to explore.
There have been calls today for them to not be awarded any more government contracts. They have been awarded further contracts since this came to light. Would you support those calls for that to be paused, for Fujitsu not to get any more government business until this is cleared up, and if they need to have fessed up and paid up, that's happened too?
Well, I think you need to. It's not quite as clear cut. I don't want to obfuscate, but I don't think it's quite as clear cut in terms of the fact that Fujitsu still have the Horizon contract that ironically. Well, it's not that ironic though, of course, because it's their bit of software. So given what you imagine, software.
Given what we know is, I mean, it's pretty questionable, isn't it?
Yeah, if it's new contracts, I think if you're extending existing contracts, I think that's fair enough because it's too difficult to change midstream. New contracts, I think my understanding is that they've been taken off the frameworks that allow the preferential approach to bid, but they can still bid in like any other company might do. That's something that I'm sure we can and should be looking at.
And what you'd like to see that reassessed, because right now some of those victims' taxes are going into the hands of Fujitsu under new contracts that have been signed since then. It's an outrage, isn't it?
Yeah, well, I think it's also a matter of you want to make sure that you've got contractors that you can trust, and whether you've got people under investigation and not yet having answered questions. I think that is always going to be part of the tendering process anyway, frankly.
Talk to me about Paula Reynolds. She has decided, some people say slightly late in the day, to hand back her CBE. I presume, Paul, you think that was the right step, but is the sort of row about this a bit of an unwelcome, unhelpful distraction, do you think?
Well, I think it's part of what would come anyway in that statutory inquiry into what Paula Reynolds and other senior managers of the post office at that time knew and didn't know, and why they were doubling down on the court case and trying to outspend the Elevates and the other group litigants, and trying to accuse Justice Fraser, trying to remove him from that court case as well, which would have meant this court case would have had to start all over again. That's pretty egregious behaviour by the, from looking from the outside, the questions get them to be answered in the inquiry. So I think I was calling for the fact that she should have the wherewithal to, take the mood of the nation and actually hand her CBE back, and I'm glad that she's done that. Let's focus on the big stuff, obviously.
When you were Minister in charge of this, did you ever have a direct conversation with the Prime Minister about this?
Yes, I did. Well, actually, we met some of the postmasters together in number 10, virtually. It was during COVID at the time, and so I was talking to him about that. This was after he'd already announced in Parliament that we were setting up this, when he was asked directly, will you set up an inquiry? He said yes, and I went to it on and saw I started how we're going to do it, and I was glad that he leapt into it. And he was really keen of stuff. He saw the injustice. He didn't really have at that time the detail, which is why he wanted to be postmasters himself, to hear the detail himself. That's the sort of stark contrast from that what we've heard 10 years ago from David, people like that, who at that time, I don't know what he had in front of him, what he didn't have in front of him. Boris was very keen to look for himself and see the injustices.
Paul, great to speak to you. Thank you. Paul Scully there, Conservative MP for Sutton and Cheam, former Postal Affairs Minister between 2020 and 2022. One of the few politicians, I would say, who can actually hold their head up high when it comes to the handling of this scandal. What should justice look like? If you've been directly involved in this, or indirectly involved in this, what would justice look like to you? Clearly, as Paul's talking about, exoneration, compensation, those are just the absolute minimum that needs to happen. Beyond that, what would you like to see change? What would you like to see be done as a result of what's happened? 0345 6060 973. And why do you think this scandal, this issue, has this week so captured the public attention, so tapped into something in our country? Is it, am I right to say it's about power? It's about power imbalances. It's about the way that elites, corrupt elites, dodgy elites in some cases, can trample all over the rights, the freedoms, the lives of decent, honest people. That people can connect with that because, as I say, it's happened before, it will happen again. This is an example of the huge imbalances of power in our country. That's why people are so angry. Is it that? Is that part of it? Is it something else? 0345 6060 973. More for that to come in just a moment. Ben Kentish on LBC. The time 10:19. LBC.
Hello. I'm on holiday this week, scuba diving in the Caribbean. I'm going to be underwater most of the time. So if you want me, you might have to learn whale. Yours, Lucy.
Take your holiday as seriously as British Airways Holidays take your holiday. ATA protects it.
At Barclays, we know money can be tricky to navigate. We're here to help you find your way around it. Barclays Life Skills gives you the skills and knowledge to help you become more confident with money. So whether it's learning to keep track of your spending, or interview tips to help you secure that new job, we've got you covered. Join the millions who've helped so far. Search Barclays Life Skills. Barclays, make money work for you. 18 million Life Skills participants, figure independently assured.
You've arrived, your dream holiday. You got there for less thanks to comparing flight prices on Kayak. An idyllic local restaurant nestled in the cliffs. A peaceful pool with your own private sunbed. This is the life. All you have to do is actually book it. Don't holidays, use Kayak to compare flight prices from hundreds of travel sites and bag a great deal. Search Kayak and go see for yourself.
With UK Export Finance, I'm fulfilling more export orders from around the world with working capital support.
Export insurance means I'll get paid when exporting to challenging markets.
At UK Export Finance, we believe no viable UK export should fail for lack of finance or insurance. Between 2022 and 2023, we provided £6.5 billion of government-backed trade finance to support UK exports. Learn how we could help you win export contracts, fulfill orders, and get paid. Search UK Export Finance today.
Ben Kentish on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
10:21 is the time. Ben Kentish here on LBC, asking you what you think justice should look like for the victims of the post office scandal, but also why you think this has really, really come to light so much this week. Why it's got people talking, it's got people furious in the way that it has this week. What has it tapped into? What does it reveal? What does it show about what's going on? It's not just a lone example, is it? People are angry on behalf of the victims, of course they are, but I think they're also angry because this scandal tells us something about how our country works, how our politics often doesn't work, how for far too long those people, just like so many others, just like the contaminated blood victims, just like the Grenfell Tower, the cladding victims, the list goes, just like the Hillsborough victims, the list goes on. Too often, important, powerful people are able to trample all over completely innocent people who have done nothing wrong and make out that they are to blame for the failings of the elites. So to Blake in Bank on this. Hi, Blake.
Hi, evening, Ben. How are you?
Yeah, I'm fine, thank you. Are you?
Yeah, I am. Brilliant show. I actually haven't spoken to you before, and your question absolutely resonated. I was in the car driving back to the house, and I thought to myself, it's actually so fundamental to, I think, the way in which society has almost become, accepting is the wrong word, but has just realised that this is kind of commonplace now. And now this happens in the postal service, but this could be in health, it could be in education, it could be in the local government. The powerful are not held to account, and there is no independent body or almost a watchdog, too strong a word, but there is no way that the average member of the public who may be victim of this and take the postmasters or the sub-postmasters, or even, I don't know, junior doctors or anything like that, they've got nowhere to go. They can't fight against the firepower of government or basically unending bank accounts for legal fees. It's only too easy for professional bodies to go, oh, well, okay, I'll take that contract to go after X, Y, Z. I don't know how much the legal fees were. I think they were close to $5 billion that have been paid out by government. And you might say, might ring it after you go, what did you know? Well, I can tell you from experience examples that I've been through this. And when you're fighting an argument in a case on your own against that sort of firepower, and you've got whatever the agenda is, and then a lot of people, and I totally sympathise with some of my postmasters who've gone, I can't fight this, I'm just going to pay the money and watch my life implode. And then there are those like the people that have stood up and fought and said, that's not acceptable. I did the same, but it cost me hundreds of thousands of pounds and nearly ruined me. But it's very hard to stand your ground. And I watched a friend of mine basically decide to take his own life on Christmas Eve, and because he couldn't fence it, because he was ruined.
By this or something different?
No, not by the postman.
Something similar. But that's what it illustrates. It illustrates that if you are a normal person and someone in a position of power or wealth or influence chooses to go after you or to mistreat you in some way or make you the fall guy or woman, as in this case, there is very little you can do. And that is something that I think people instinctively understand, because they feel that could be them too. That those poor postmasters could be a lot of us.
That's absolutely right. And these people, whichever sector it may be, the minority of those that turn around and go, I'm going to fight this, because they've got families, they've got children, they've got lives, and they have to look after that. And the colleague of mine who is no longer here anymore realised that there was no way he could do it. His reputation was destroyed, and those people in power said, if you employ this person again in the sector, you're next. And there was no accountability for that. So there has to be some cultural shift, irrespective of the government. You watch the transition of culture in this country. I think that's what's gripped the hearts and minds of people to go, this isn't right. And I totally agree with you. As far as gongs are concerned, it shouldn't have even been allocated in the first place.
This is it. Giving it back is one thing, isn't it? In the same way as paying compensation is one thing. It's nowhere near enough. There have to be consequences. Oh, Blake, are you still there? Like, your line's dropped, I'm afraid. But the point you're making is spot on. It's people fall upwards. Paula Reynolds gets another job. Of course she does. If that was any ordinary person that had overseen that level of wrongdoing, whether or not they were personally responsible, they would struggle to ever get another job. These people just fall upwards. They just fall into another well-paying cushy job. Fujitsu, the very heart of this scandal, gets awarded new government contract. Why? Why are there never consequences? Fujitsu should not be awarded another government contract for a decade. Because only when there are proper consequences, only when there are consequences for the companies and the leaders involved in these sorts of fiascos, will they stop happening. While the wealthy, powerful conscious of this, I'll get another job. My mate's in that business or my mate's in that government department, they'll sort me out. They'll give me a non-executive directorship. Or Fujitsu thinks, yeah, we'll have to pay compensation, but on the other hand, we're getting millions of quid from that other contract they gave us in 2019. It's a joke. There have to be consequences. Even now, the instinct is, oh, how much should we pay them? Pay them off, give them the compensation, make it go away. Money, money, money. And yes, of course that has to happen. It's nowhere near enough. The people responsible for this, directly and indirectly, and that includes the people who handed Fujitsu that contract after this became to it includes the people who handed Paul Evans that CBE disgracefully, surely knowing that it was equivalent to sticking two fingers in the form of a gong up at the victims of this scandal. There have to be consequences for them too. Everybody who has any part in what happened to those 700 and odd postmasters has to feel the consequences, because only then will justice be served. You can't just give them a few tens of thousands of pounds or hundreds of thousands of pounds. You've got to give a few million and say, okay, that's done. That's justice. Justice has to be seen. Justice has to be served on the people responsible. It's not just a check. Blake, thank you for your call. Really, really appreciate it. Let's go to Rose in West Devon. Yes, hi, Rose.
Oh, hello, Ben. Yes, I agree with everything you say. I haven't seen the programme, but I had read about it before, and I also read a pretty long article in the Radio Times, and it seems very clear to me. I think, yes, people are infuriated because of the power thing, but also it's very, very clear and transparent that individuals chose to destroy other individuals' lives, and there seems to be absolutely no reason why the people who suffer shouldn't be able to turn around and say, that person lied to me, and that person made sure that I was, the kangaroo court that they set up and I was put in prison. Those are clear, blazingly clear wrongdoings, and they simply need to, be able to go to the police and have them arrested.
Well, the police are looking into it. Let's hope that actually goes somewhere. But Rose is spot on. It's not just that they chose to make people victims to cover their own bad sides of this. It's that for a long time they were able to do it, and they came pretty close to getting away with it.
Yes, I mean, you wonder why, because none of the people we're talking about at the moment are not Fujitsu or whatever it's called. They're the post office. So why on earth couldn't they simply have said, look, it's clearly to do with the Horizon thing, it's not to do with these people. But they chose, no, I think I'll just destroy this person's life. I mean, that speaks of a really diseased sort of mind.
It does. But there's a wider problem there, isn't there, Rose? Which is that even once those people had made that decision to throw innocent people under the bus, because of the power dynamic, because they had so much influence and sway, they were able to do it. They decided, I'm not going to take the flak for this, you are, and they were able to they were able to make that happen, and that's what people find. They find it outrageous, but they also perhaps find it frightening, because it just illustrates what these people, if they're in those positions of power, can get away with.
It is frightening, and I think this point about the power has been made very, very clearly, and I think I suppose it makes any difference, but in a sense it's less frightening if you look at it actually what it is, and it is ordinary human beings saying, right, I'm going to destroy that person's life because it'll make life easier for me.
Yes.
And that's wickedness, which in the street, no, I don't want to go back to this power thing, because I think it's almost like makes everybody feel helpless. There's nothing we can do. Look at these people as individuals. This Paula woman, whatever her name is, she's an individual with no conscience whatsoever, and she was overseeing it, so clearly she needs arresting and prosecuting.
Well, as I say, there's the judging inquiry. The police are looking into it. You would hope that whoever is found to have broken the law would have the book. Well, we can't preempt it, of course, but anyone who's found guilty to have even to have broken any law should have the whole library of books. Because again, until people in positions of power start to realise that they can't just get what they want, that they can't just trample whichever quote-unquote little people that they think they can trample over, this will keep happening. There will be more post office scandals, there will be more contaminated blood scandals, there will be more Hillsboroughs, until something far more fundamental in this country changes in terms of the power dynamic between the powerful elite and everybody else. and normal people just going about their business, trying to do their jobs, and carrying the can and taking the flak for things when they go wrong. Rose, lovely to speak to you as always. Thank you. Rose in West Devon. Lots of calls coming in on this. 0345 6060 973. 2 questions for you this hour. What should justice look like for the victims of the post office scandal? If you're one of them, if you're a friend or family of one of them, what should justice look like for you? Second question is, what is it that has captured your sort of the public mood on this? Let's put it that way. What has made people so angry about this? Rose and I and Blake think it's about power. It's about what it exposes, about really who holds the cards in this country. Is there something else? 0345 6060 973. Still to come.
This bill blocks every single reason that has ever been used to prevent flights to Rwanda from taking off.
Significant breaking news on the government's Rwanda plan in the last few minutes. We'll get the details from our political editor, Natasha Clark, after the news headlines at 10:33 from Tim Daly.
It's believed the Prime Minister could make an announcement tomorrow on what the government plans to do next about the Horizon scandal at the Post Office. The Post Office Minister, Kevin Holinrake, will be talking to Nick Ferrari on LBC tomorrow morning from 7. A group of Tory MPs are trying to force changes to the government's Rwanda plan in an effort to toughen the current bill up. Among other things, their changes would give ministers the power to automatically ignore Strasbourg court injunctions. And doctors say the US Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin has prostate cancer, but they say his diagnosis was early and the prognosis is excellent. LBC weather, spots of light rain for northern England, along with the south and the east of Scotland overnight. Clear elsewhere with a low of -5 degrees.
LBC, Nick Ferrari at breakfast.
Coming up tomorrow morning with Nick Ferrari at breakfast, disgraced former post office boss Paula Venables hands back her CBE. But how can we now ensure the victims get the compensation that they deserve? Nick will speak live to the Post Office Minister, Kevin Holinrake. Plus, David Cameron says he's worried that Israel might have committed war crimes in Gaza. Nick will ask if the Foreign Secretary is right to be concerned. And the government's controversial Rwanda policy will be challenged by amendment tomorrow. Nick speaks to a high-profile Tory rebel. All that and more coming up with Nick Ferrari at breakfast tomorrow morning from 7 o'clock, right here on LBC.
Nick Ferrari at breakfast. Listen on your radio and on Global Player. This is LBC. Introducing the new all-electric BMW iX1 eDrive 20. Bold exterior aesthetics make way for a comfortable interior that features innovative technology to connect you to your drive like never before. With a range of up to 293 miles, now is the time to electrify your dreams. Search BMW iX1 eDrive 20 to book a test drive. Test drive subject to status and availability. WLTP range may not reflect real driving results.
Roll up for entrancing delight. A mouth-marvelingly testacular, wonderful sight. Uncannily suckable, soothingly sumptuous, mysteriously mentally tongue-twirlingly scrumptious. We see great flavour in your future. Marvel with Jacobs of Boston since 1907.
Here are the words every timeshare owner will be dreading to hear. Your 2024 timeshare maintenance fees are due. If you own a timeshare, you need to consider whether it's a good investment. MyTimeshareClaim.co.uk has helped thousands of owners who were missold exit their contract and receive compensation. Visit MyTimeshareClaim.co.uk or text ASSIST to 78900 to find out more.
Hello, cruisers. Just here, relaxing, watching the world cruise by under the sun. And that's the way we like it, right? You know, booking a cruise should be that breezy too. As supercruises.com has over 18,000 awesome cruises to choose from. You just click, book, cruise.
Supercruises.com, the ultimate cruise booking experience. Supercruises.com makes booking super simple.
Hi, I'm James Reed, and Mondays are working for me because I've got great people working for me, and I find them on reed.co.uk. Take Jeff here. We just hired him to join the team as a web developer, and now he loves Mondays. Isn't that right, Jeff? Mondays are working for me. A quicker day job, Jeff. So what are you waiting for? Post your first job on reed.co.uk for just £89. Now,
terms and conditions apply. Please visit reed.co.uk for details.
This This is LBC with Ben Kentish.
It's Peter and Guildford. Ben, I think this has caught on because people are fed up with the way that those at the top can do what they like and trample on people and get away with it, whether that be politicians, corporations or whoever. Peter, I think you're right. Chrissy says it speaks to an eroded sense of integrity and responsibility over the past few decades by people in positions of power. They are more interested in keeping their position than doing the right thing. It's essentially cowardice, which is only revealed when enough eyes are upon them and exposed. And that again is spot on. You can draw lines, can't you, of comparison between Partygate, between some of the scandals involving the Metropolitan Police, and this. You can draw lines between the way that people in power seem to think that they can follow different rules to the rest of us, and in some cases can blame the rest of us when things go wrong. That's what people are sick of, isn't it? It's that sense of one rule for us and one rule for everyone else. If something goes wrong, blame us. That's what happened in this case, and that's what we've seen happen so often in the last few years. And you, if you're anything like me, are absolutely sick to the back teeth. More of your calls to come on that in just a moment. 10:39 is the time. Let's talk first about breaking news story tonight involving the government's Rwanda bill. It's due back in the House of Commons next week, we learned today. It's designed to finally get those flights off the ground. And a year and a half, 400 million quid later, but some Tory MPs still think the legislation Rishi Sunak is bringing through doesn't go far enough. They have announced in the last few minutes what they plan to do about it. Natasha Clark joins us, LBC's political editor. Natasha, very good evening to you. What are they going to do about it? Good evening.
Evening, Ben. It feels like it's been maybe a week or maybe 2 weeks since we last spoke about Rwanda, and it's back again, yet again.
The joys.
I know. It's always joyful talking about Rwanda. But yes, tonight Rebel Tories have put down several amendments to the new law. They demand Rishi Sunak give ministers the power to automatically block these so-called Section 39 foreign court orders and quash any legal challenges to get those flights off to Rwanda. They say that this group is around 30 top Tories. They're led by the former Immigration Minister Robert Jenrick, the former Home Secretary Suella Braverman. They've put forward at least 4 amendments tonight. They say that the bill just does not work as it stands. They say the stakes could not be higher. The Prime Minister's actually talked about these Section 39 orders before. This new law will actually give them the power to ignore it, but essentially this new amendment would force ministers to do so unless there was a very good reason not to do. Robert Jenrick has said tonight the new laws as they stand simply won't work and will mean flights to Rwanda will be grounded. He says it will cost more in farcical migrant hotels and billions more of wasted taxpayers' money in the year to come.
There are some pretty influential figures, pretty senior figures on that list, as you say, Natasha, Suella Braverman, Sir John Redwood, Sir Jake Berry, Robert Jenrick among them. Do they have the numbers to get this through?
Well, at the moment, they say that there's a group of around 30 of them. So at the moment, as that stands, not quite enough to inflict a defeat in the House of Commons. But they would just need a few more Conservatives to join them in order to do so. And they are a very influential group, not just Robert Jenrick and Suella Braverman, who have obviously just left the Home Office quite recently. Robert Jenrick says tonight, I've seen the legal advice, I've seen the operational plans. It's evident that this is not going to work. That will be quite powerful, I think, for a lot of Conservative MPs. And also some quite sensible people on that list too, not just, I think, so-called Tory headbangers, as some critics would refer to them. It's not just them. I think there will be some other people will say, actually, I do think that some of these people will have a point. And the Prime Minister has said that he is open to bright ideas from all wings of the party to try and tweak this legislation. But I think the chances of the government accepting it are going to be quite low. They have said that they would be willing to tweak it if somebody comes forward with an idea that they think will work. But I don't quite see, especially after the Rebels marched the government all the way up the hill before Christmas with the second reading of this bill, threatening to vote it down, and none of them did in the end. Some of them abstained, quite a big group did, but at the end of the day, none of them voted it down. So that's going to be a bit of a guessing game for the government. They're going to weigh up whether the stakes are that high decide whether they would actually vote this thing down or not. And I think the chances of significant changes to the bill are quite unlikely.
Natasha, great to have you on. Thank you. That's Natasha Clark, LBC's political editor. Tory rebels threatening to rebel and then actually stepping into line at the last minute. We've seen it before, we'll see it again. This, though, it's a challenge to Rishi Sunak's authority once again. Will he hold firm or will he compromise? Will he cave and end up with some sort of fudge that the rebels support, that he supports, that isn't actually what the government put forward, but something that he's had to cobble together in order to win round some of his colleagues? That will open the door, of course, to Labour saying, look, he's done it again, he's caved to his backbenchers, he's weak, he's lost authority, call a general election. They'll probably do that anyway. An interesting week of political manoeuvring and posturing once again, this time over the scheme. Natasha, thank you again. 10:43 at the time. Ben Kentish here on LBC. Let's come back to your calls about the post office scandal. What does it tell us about the state of our country? What does it shine a light on? And if you've been involved, indirectly or directly, what should justice look like? Richard's in Woolwich on this. Hi, Richard.
Hey, Ben. Thanks for letting me on. Ben, if when I have a chat with Brexiters online or some friends, they always ask me, why did you vote, to remain? Why do you want the Europeans to be a parliament that oversees our system? Why do you want a sovereign Britain? Well, I want it for this reason, Ben. I think it's absolutely abhorrent how ruling classes of this country can just completely walk over the average Briton in this country. I have no trust in them, and I absolutely want more controls over these people than less.
Because you don't trust their own political class, you'd rather have a political class in Brussels holding their feet to the fire.
Yeah, exactly. That's always been the reason why I've supported sort of second, third, fourth chamber, more accountability rather than less. And isn't it amusing? Of course, it was the Tory party ultimately that were in power when all this happened, and of course they put them through that absolute charade of giving them gongs and making them tap swords and go through ceremonies in order to shut them up. I'm just so disgusted with this country. It's another example of how the 96% of people in this country are ruled by the 4% elite, and it absolutely sickens me.
And that's why, is that your sense, Richard, of why this has got people so up in arms, why it's got people so angry? People who have absolutely no connection to the post office, have never met anyone who works in the post office, apart from when you go to the post office, and yet still feel outraged and appalled by this. My sense is it's not just on behalf of victims. Of course, empathy and sympathy with them is part of it, but it's also what you're describing. It's about knowing that the vast majority of people can be trampled all over by those in positions of power.
Absolutely, Ben. It's a sense of powerlessness that we have, and we've had it from day one. And it starts from this kind of monarchical system. It goes right the way through. It's in the public school system. It's everywhere. It's this entitled, privileged breed who think that they just can rule over us. And I think that this TV program show, which I thought was brilliant, and I followed the story anyway, is at the end of the day, if you keep fighting these people, ultimately they are cowards and they will give in. And I'm thrilled that this is now leading the narrative.
Richard, great call. Again, hitting the nail on the head, I think, of why this has tapped into so much disgust. It's disgusting the way that these people have been able to behave and been able, for too long, in some cases, to get away with it completely so often. Richard, thank you for your call. Still to come, lots more calls on this, lots more texts and tweets, plus I'll have a look at just the stories leading tomorrow's newspaper front pages as Rishi Sunak prepares, we are told, to announce what the government is going to do to try to put things right for the victims of this fiasco. 10:46.
Nick Ferrari at breakfast. Back tomorrow morning from 7. Listen on your radio and on Global Player.
Fujitsu over Horizon scandal. Do you think Fujitsu should bear the brunt of the compensation payments? Jonathan in General Hospital. Promising damage. I am so upset by this. When you think of the pain and anguish they've caused. John in Birmingham. The corporate world has got to be held accountable. This has been going on for 20 years.
Nick Ferrari at breakfast.
EDF, helping to cut carbon and cost for everyone.
LBC.
Hello. I'm currently out of office. article I read recently said we're more relaxed and more productive after a good break. So I've gone to Barbados for a month. Besides, yours, Toby.
Take your holiday as seriously as British Airways Holidays take your holiday. At all protected.
Want to work in the media? Kickstart your career with Global Academy. Apply now to be a 10th class at this unique media school. Search Global Academy.
If you've ever tried unblocking a drain yourself, you'll know it's a stinky, smelly, dirty job. And rarely ever as straightforward as it sounds. So if you've got a blockage, think happy thoughts and call in the experts. For a fixed price drain and block and CCTV inspection, click happydrains.co.uk.
At Tesco Mobile, we'll help you have your cake and eat it too. Save a tasty £36 on our 100 gig SIM. Just £16 a month with club card prices. And what's more, that price is frozen, so the saving is baked in for the duration of your contract. Sweet. This is Supermarket Mobile. Search Tesco Mobile. Every little helps.
Ends 31st of January. Club card and 24-month British premium required. Value issued of 3,000 club card points. Terms at tescomobile.com/terms.
Get set for the new year and grab yourself a bargain in the biggest ever January sale at Robert Dyer's. We've slashed prices on hundreds of lines. We have fantastic deals on everything from tech to furniture, garden to cast iron cookware, and not forgetting must-have air fryers. So hurry while stocks last. For all this and more, find us on your local high street or at robertdyers.co.uk.
The British Airways original sale has just landed, with hundreds of business class flights like a New York return for $1799. Now's your chance to switch off before takeoff in one of our lounges, or stretch out in a seat that converts into a fully flat bed. Book your British Airways flights and holidays at ba.com/sale. Sale ends January 30th. Limited availability. Terms and conditions apply.
Ben Kentish on LBC. Text 84850.
Great text from Keith here. Ben, this insight exposes the long-running lie that underlies people's perception of justice, whether it's corporate or political. It reflects an understanding in elite circles that the law is easily manipulated in their favour as opposed to the people's view that we are all subject to equality of the law. This piggybacked upon tobacco's PPE and the way in which discourse has taken a course of turn since the advent of Boris Johnson. Two scapegoats are in sight, and the government will be looking to see if that alone will save public opinion so they can brush this under the carpet. That's it, isn't it? That first line in Keith's sentence. This insult exposes the long-running lie that underlies people's perception of justice. It represents an understanding in elite circles that the law is easily manipulated. That's it, isn't it? That if you are in a position of power, if you are wealthy, if you are part of the so-called elite, whether that's political or business or whatever it might be, your word counts for more, even in the eyes of the law, even in the eyes of the police and the courts, than the word of someone who doesn't have your status or your money. That's how our justice system works. That's what this has shone a light on. See also Grenfell, see also Cladding, see also contaminated blood, see also Hillsborough. The list goes on and on and on, and this is just the latest example of it. Talk to Stephen, first time caller in Uxbridge, on that in just a moment. First, let's have a look at tomorrow's newspaper front pages, which of course are dominated particularly by this very story, this very story, rightly so. The Mirror, starting with that newspaper, their headline, "Shameful." A widow today telling the Mirror how her husband was destroyed by the post office scandal. Marion Holmes said her husband Peter died in 2015, still considered a criminal over false claims missing from his post office. The Daily Mail says, "Now give back your millions," as Paula Reynolds hands back at CBE. Victims say, "What about advance bonuses and pension?" Call for her to hand back £3 million she has earned. Again, rightly so, if you ask me. The Daily Telegraph, architect of postal scandal demands immunity. IT expert who created the faulty software has twice had testimony to the inquiry delayed. He is reported to be asking for immunity before giving evidence. He was a senior computer engineer at Fujitsu, according to the Daily Telegraph. The Sun, despite what we now know about his role in this. Same similar story from the post office scandal firm Fujitsu was given VIP treatment to win major new UK deals. Absolutely tapped into what we're talking about, isn't it? About lack of consequences, about things being swept under the carpet, about people and organisations just falling upwards even when they are involved in the most appalling wrongdoing. And finally, the story we just discussed with Natasha is on the front page of the Daily Express. Rebels fire wall of shot at Prime Minister over Rwanda bill. Sunak, says the Express, facing a showdown with his colleagues after they issue a series of demands to toughen up new Rwanda deportation rules. Up in newspapers tomorrow, 10:53 is the time. Let's talk to Stephen, first time caller in Uxbridge at Post Office. Stephen, welcome. Hi.
Good evening. Thank you both for taking my call. First time caller. Yeah, I think the focus here ought to be on the idea that this is a private prosecution. You mentioned sort of police before, but these are private prosecutors that are not subject to the same levels of scrutiny and checks and balances that the CPS, for example, might approach a case. And, you have a private prosecutor with an agenda. Of course, this can cause and create injustice like this. I think it's important that the persons that are responsible within those organisations that carry out these private prosecutions should be held fully accountable. The paymaster in this instance, perhaps the post office, of course, is paying them to see things coming through, to see details that appear, to withhold those from the Defence Council, and this is what creates this injustice, and they should be fully held accountable in this. I think it's also a great shame that it's taken a television programme to draw attention to this matter. Nick Wallace has written that book some time ago, where it details all of this, but the fact that the public only now react because of a series of four programmes that went out on the ITV last week in itself is scandalous, but the damage that has been done to these people in their local communities is immeasurable. And I think, I think private prosecutions per se are just not subject to the same scrutiny, checks and balances that might normally, with a CPS inquiry. The CPS would be far more balanced, would be more independent, and I think it is important that private prosecutors carry out this level of prosecution. Once they reach a certain number in a row, these organisations should be checked to see what they're actually doing. Somebody else should be looking at somebody independent must look at it.
Does it raise questions, Stephen, about the system of private prosecution? Do we need to look closely at whether that is...
Of course, the largest private prosecutor in the UK, the RSPCA, I mean, look at what has gone on there. Some of those cases are astonishing, and that is a much larger private prosecutor operating. But I think it's quite important where private prosecutions go on, but if an organisation is performing a number of private prosecutions, as in, for example, the Post Office did in this instance, 700 or 800 people, but someone else is checking what they're doing. Why isn't this given over to the CPS? Why wouldn't that be? And this would have stopped. This could not have continued.
But again,
this would have been identified so much earlier on.
I go back to the same point, though, Stephen. Doesn't it just shine a light on it? I know I'd link it to some of the scandals, even the Me Too movement, Harvey Weinstein. If you are famous, if you are rich, if you are in a position of seniority in an organisation, even in the eyes of justice, whether that's private or otherwise, your word is listened to and believed more than the word of a normal person on the street.
Of course, and it's a form of licensing, allowing them to do what they like. And of course, the poor victims cannot compete against the legal teams to defend themselves. And that's what people just don't remember. They were told the computer says this is difficult. Please stop them. Just accept it and you'll get a lower sentence. These people just sort of, were unable to defend themselves. It's shocking.
It's outrageous. It is. You're right, Stephen, and you're absolutely spot on to point that out. Certain questions, the dark cloud that's hanging over the system of private prosecutions calls for that to be looked at. Absolutely right, it should be. Great call, Stephen. Thanks for calling again, Sue. Let's go to Michael in Rains Park. Evening, Michael.
Hi there, Ben. Thanks for having me on. Some great points have been made in this hour. Obviously, and last night as well. Obviously, there's an issue on in terms of getting the compensation, which is very similar to the infected blood scandal. The wheels of justice are turning very slowly on that. I have heard allegations on LBC about what the post office has been doing in terms of disclosure. Obviously, if there is an issue there, that needs to be punished by the courts via a cost order or even contempt of court proceedings. But they also should be trying to expedite cases like this so that victims are not dying and they can be compensated as quickly as possible. But I also had another point about how more focus could have been put on this case from a political side, and I think it could have been, if there have been parliamentarians that have been campaigning on this issue, and boy, they should have been campaigning on this issue, then I think the system of parliamentary select committees could have been used. For example, I think parliamentary select committees should have the legal power to call witnesses. And
they do, don't they, Michael? I thought they did. You can be in contempt of Parliament if you don't show up. Yes. Can you?
My understanding was that they could not legally oblige witnesses to appear. That they could only. I know that there has been a bit of grandstanding by some MPs on these select committees, but my understanding was that the reason that they weren't quite as hard-toothed in some cases was that, unlike the US congressional committees, my understanding was that parliamentary committees were always by invitation. But
no, I think I'm pretty confident they do have the power to compel people to turn up. It's not used very often, but I can think of some cases in recent years where people were refusing to show up and the committees did at least threaten to use that power. Michael, you're right to say Parliament needs to be given perhaps more of a say over this. My question is, my response would be, as we heard from Paul Scully right at the start of the show, when this was discussed in the Commons just a few weeks ago, barely any MPs showed up. Now that it's been on ITV and people are demanding action, suddenly those MPs start taking interest. So it's not just powers that are missing, it's also interest, it's also engagement, frankly, on the part of some of our politicians when they don't think that there's votes to be won in this stuff. Wrongly, in this case. Michael, as always, thank you for your call, sir. Really appreciate it. Really interesting conversation. I'm sure we'll revisit it. Coming up after the news, though, 1 in 5 children in this country right now is routinely missing school. It's a staggering statistic, isn't it? 1 in 5 children having their futures blighted by the fact that they're not getting a proper education. The question to you is a simple one. Why? Why are so many children not where they should be? In the classroom, in lessons, in school? What's going on here? If you're a teacher, if you're a parent, if you're a child who's not at school, what's the problem, and how on earth do we fix it?
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
Leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 11 o'clock, ministers say they are actively considering a new law to clear the names of the 700 post office workers wrongly convicted of fraud over faulty IT software. It's expected Rishi Sunak could announce new legislation tomorrow, but the barrister, Dr. Sam Foles, has told LBC the government should stay out of legal proceedings.
I think the courts are perfectly capable of doing this. I think it's very dangerous to start trampling on the very deeply held principles that are actually essential for overturning all the many, many other miscarriages of justice that we have to deal with every day.
Some Tory MPs are trying to force changes to the government's Rwanda plans, saying they want to see the current bill being toughened up. If adopted, one of their changes would give ministers the power to automatically ignore court injunctions from Strasbourg. LBC's political editor, Natasha Clark, has more.
A group of 30 Tory MPs, including Robert Jenrick and Suella Braverman, have tonight fired a warning shot to the Prime Minister as they put down a number of changes to his flagship Rwanda law. Their amendments would see ministers automatically ignore foreign court orders and close loopholes in a bid to toughen up the new legislation. They say the stakes of the country couldn't be higher. The bill will come back to the House of Commons next week. Natasha Clark, LBC, Westminster.
A live broadcast by an Ecuadorian TV station has been interrupted by people carrying guns who made staff lie on the floor before shots were heard. Violence has broken out in parts of the country after a notorious member of a drug gang escaped from prison. Doctors say the US Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin has prostate cancer, but his chances of recovery are good. The White House, which has only just found out about his illness, has begun a review of staff sickness procedures. LBC's US correspondent, Kate Fisher, says the illness has caused some problems in Washington.
This has been bubbling for a couple of days over here when it was discovered that Lloyd Austin has actually been hospitalised since the 1st of January, but failed to let the President or any of his senior officials in the Pentagon know about this hospitalisation.
An environmental emergency is being declared in northern Spain because tiny plastic pellets are washing up on its shores. The problem began after a shipping container fell off a transport vessel last month. And in sport, Middlesbrough have the advantage in their EFL Cup semi-final against Chelsea. The championship side beat the Premier League opponents 1-0 in the first leg at the Riverside Stadium. LBC weather, spots of light rain for northern England as well as the south and the east of Scotland overnight. Clear for much of the country though, with lows of -5. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Tim Daly.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with Ben Kentish.
11:04 the time, Ben Kentish here on LBC. Now, if I ask you to imagine your childhood, for most of us I would imagine, one of the first things that would come into your head would be your education. It would be time at school, primary school, secondary school, time perhaps at college or university. Whether you liked it or not, it is a key part of growing up. It dominates our childhood. It is the vast bulk of the years that we spend growing up. We spend in a classroom, we spend in the education system, and that's how it should be. It's how it's been for a long time. But no longer for quite a lot of young people today. 1 in 5 of whom are routinely absent from school. That's in general, that's across the school-age population today. If you are from a disadvantaged background and you are in year 10, so what's that, about 15 years old, that figure rises to half. 50% of disadvantaged pupils in year 10 are persistently absent from school. 1.7 million pupils missed 10% or more of their school time last autumn. A further 120,000 spent less than half their time in school, the so-called ghost children that the government talks about. What on earth is happening? Yes, of course, people have always bunked lessons back in my day. If you were bored by double maths, you might sneak off and go to the shop or hang out on the school playing field behind the bushes. That's always happened. I cannot think of a single person who, in my school, was absent more than 50% of the time. That is incredible. These are kids' futures that are being destroyed by the fact that they're not in the classroom when they should be. They're not where they should be when they should be. What explains this, in your view? There's different explanations. It's poor parenting, some might say. It's parents not appreciating the importance of education, thinking their little darlings will do well whatever happens to them and just letting them have their way. So if son or daughter in the morning says, I don't want to go to school, mummy or daddy increasingly says, OK, don't worry, that's fine, rather than saying, tough, you're going to go, that's the law. Is that part of what's going on? Is it just bad parenting? Is it absent parenting? Is it the cost of living crisis, meaning that parents simply don't have the time and the resources anymore to force their children to go to school? Parents come into it. You've got to look at the kids themselves. Is this about a generation that really doesn't have the discipline or the endurance, or the motivation to get themselves an education? Maybe. You can't overlook mental health. You can't overlook that the generation that's not going to school, in far too many cases, is also the generation struggling badly with anxiety and depression and eating disorders. We know that from the statistics. Or is there also an element to which the school curriculum and the whole education system isn't really serving people growing up today? That they want to be influencers, they want to be YouTubers, they want to be coders, they don't want to learn complex trigonometry or study A Midsummer Night's Dream or Twelfth Night or learn about different types of tectonic plates or what have you. Is there a sense that actually school isn't working for them and so they're not working at school? Different explanations, different ways of trying to get into looking at why children aren't going to school in the numbers that they used to be. It's particularly since COVID. Something changed during the pandemic, but I'm slightly confused about what. Why those 2 years of disrupted education seem to have convinced so many children, so many parents, that school isn't important. You'd think the time out of the classroom and all the damage that we know that did to kids would emphasise the importance of being at school, not the opposite. And yet the reverse has happened. What's happening here? Why are so many children not going to school? Why are so many parents either not bothering or not able to force their kids to go? 0345 6060 973. Labour today says it will solve the problem by introducing free breakfast clubs. If you're a parent struggling with your child going to school, is that the answer? Would that really help? Text me at 84850, message us on X at LBC or at Ben Kentish. Adam Peter Lang joins us, an education consultant at University College London, a former head teacher at a London secondary school. Adam Peter, very good evening to you. This absence from school is becoming more and more widespread. What's happening?
No, well, you're absolutely right. 1 in 5 now regularly miss school. Before the pandemic, it was 1 in 10, so that's doubled, hasn't it? So it is a key and challenging issue, which sometimes isn't really reported on properly. I have to praise LBC. You do that, and you talk about it on a regular basis, but quite often it's not really discussed. It's obviously being discussed now, beginning of the academic year, and it is a real problem, as you say.
What's behind it? I mean, I appreciate that's quite a complex question, but this wasn't a problem to the same extent 5-10 years ago. Something's happened. Is it the pandemic that has changed things?
Well, I think the pandemic is very key in this. In fact, just recently I was in a second-hand bookshop and I was looking at some old books, and, they have in the front, they were given to children for good attendance. So attendance has always been an issue, you go back, but it was improved on quite considerably before the pandemic. And I think what's happened is that various Centre for Social Justice has looked into it. Their parental attitudes changed now. Apparently 1 in 4 parents say that COVID has shown them that school isn't essential to go every day. Working patterns have changed. Anxiety patterns are there. So it's definitely been exacerbated considerably by the pandemic, and we haven't really got to grips with it properly with young people since.
That's really interesting, because what you're saying, Adam, is it's not just the children are saying I don't need to go to school as much as I used to. It's actively the parents that are of the view that the 5 days a week compulsory education that children by law are supposed to have isn't required in the way that they might have thought it once was.
Yes, and I'll be careful what I say. I don't think all parents are doing that, and I think some aren't. But some social studies show more recently that because children were off school, although all schools ran during the pandemic, actually, for vulnerable children and for children of key workers, but a lot of children weren't in school, and therefore patterns developed. And it's very important to get the patterns right, the routines right again. And I think it's with the children, obviously, but it's also with the parents. So, for example, you can have a case, we've got it at the moment, haven't we? Got various bugs and things going around, and people are more anxious perhaps about it than they were maybe some years ago. And they might keep the kids off, and they say, well, I don't want you bringing that back home, you've got granny living at home or something like that. And so I think that people are more likely now to say, well, have a day off. And there's definitely evidence that because people take Fridays off, there's this stay-at-home Friday pattern going on. But I think the other point I want to make is that there is the DFE talk about these ghost children, but a lot of children, I know you've talked about it on your show before, who have kind of completely come out of the education system and they need to be brought back into. So it is, as you say, complex, but pandemic is key in this, and we need to face up to that and do something about it, I think.
Does it matter, Adam Peter, what we're talking about? Some people might say, well, actually, the pandemic did show that a few days off school, a few weeks off school even, in the grand scheme of things, isn't going to damage children that much in the long term. Is that an argument that you've got much time for?
No, not really, because I think evidence showed before the pandemic, there was lots of evidence that every day in school was crucial, and I think the evidence continues to show that, because a child, if they're off school, their educational attainment will be less. So that will affect them. That might mean that the job they can get, or whether they go to college, or whether they go to university, or whatever. But it also actually affects the economy of our country, doesn't it? And I think going back to these patterns, if you get into a pattern where you're not going to school regularly or irregularly, you might do that when you go to university or college, or when you go to work. And so that's going to have an effect on the whole country and the attitude to work and so on. And I think people like the Children's Commissioner, Rachel D'Souza, the catch-up czar, Sir Kevin Collins, have all sort of said that we have got a crisis on our hands and we do need to address it in different ways. You know, stick and carrot, tough love, but also just trying to recognise that we need to do something a little bit more than just accept what's going on at the moment.
Well, I'll come on to that in just a moment. I guess just on what you're saying, though, Adam Peter, a lot of it depends, doesn't it, on what these children are doing when they're not at school. If Mum or Dad has decided that on that Friday, rather than going in, they're going to take the children to a museum, they're going to give them some sort of educational experience that they're not getting at school, you could make the argument that actually that's going to enrich their life, that's going to enrich their education more than another 6 hours in lessons would. Whereas if it's just they're sitting at home playing PlayStation or Xbox all day, that's a clearly very different matter.
Yeah, no, and there are, you don't just learn at school, clearly, and actually some of the most important lessons you learn are in other spheres. But going back to, let's say, for example, you were doing French, so GCSE, or even French at primary schools, and you missed a Friday lesson where that's when the French lesson's on, you'd really fall behind. So,
but if on that Friday you'd been taken to France for a long weekend instead, to use that example, that's slightly different, isn't it?
Well, it is, but I think that actually you'll find that in most cases that's not what they're doing on the Friday. I mean, there might be one or two cases like that. Yeah. And schools will look at that. They've been much stricter on that in the last number of years, because obviously you've got to be fair to everybody. But I do think that there are plenty of times to take children on holiday and take them to the museum in a different way. But I think really what we're saying is we need kids back in school on a regular basis for their own well-being, the academic achievement, but for their own social sort of mental health.
And you talked about the kind of carrot and stick approach there. Again, it's a complex question in terms of how we go about dealing with this and addressing it. What sort of things do you think schools, parents and the government should be prioritising when it comes to getting some of those children back in the classroom?
Well, yeah, I mean, it is a legal obligation to send your, as you said earlier, to parents to send their children to school. You can be fined if you don't do it. I mean, it's £60 fine, which can rise to £120. Now, some parents might look at that and think, well, that's just, half a bag of shopping. So I'm not going to be too worried about that. But, I mean, I'm not. The parents, in the main, are concerned about that. Schools like to apply it differently, their circumstances. Sometimes it's, when I was a head, it wasn't necessarily the best approach to take with a family or a young person to just use that stick routine. But you can do that. But I think it's more likely to address some of the other issues that are taking place at the moment, to do with why are kids less were more reluctant to stay at home, or less reluctant to go to school, as it were, and talk to them about the importance of education. That was going on full blast, I have to say, before the pandemic, in all schools across the country, and we were doing very well internationally in our figures on that. It's fallen away, and it needs to be rectified. But as you said earlier, it's complicated, and there's no simple solutions. In fact, in many cases, schools do know the solutions, and what is being reported on, both from the government, Gillian Keegan said it earlier this week, it's her number one priority, but obviously Bridget Phillipson has come out with opposition today with other ideas, and they're all saying that some support from not necessarily teachers, but support staff back in schools is crucial to this. So the teachers can teach, they can teach the French on the Friday, whereas it could be support workers could be dealing with families, trying to get the children back into school and so forth.
And Labour, as you say, Bridget Phillipson this week talking about free breakfast clubs as a way of getting some of those children back to school. Is that the right sort of approach? Is really having another couple of hours free at the start of the day? Is that going to make a big difference, Adam Peter?
Well, I was a little bit cynical about all of this a few years ago. About 10 years ago, I got taken to the US, to some of the charter schools there, and we got taken in at like 6 o'clock in the morning to see young people coming in with their families for free breakfast in the most challenging areas. This was in the Bronx, actually, and it was working. So I think there is something quite interesting about that idea about feeding young people, getting them in for that, and then they can have a school day as a consequence. So yes, I think it can work, and I think that it, particularly in primary schools, gets the children into routines, which I think they've lost over the pandemic and since, actually.
We can't talk about any of this, can we, without talking about the mental health crisis, mental health epidemic that is gripping teenagers at the moment in this country. How big a factor is that? You touched on anxiety, it's depression, it's eating disorders, it's all sorts of different types of ill mental health that are driving this. Can we sort the problem of the so-called ghost children out without fixing the state of child mental health services in the country right now?
Well, very good point. I mean, they go together. I mean, you can't just do it through schools alone. You need to be having a more holistic approach to young people and what their needs are. I mean, obviously, I'm a great believer in tough love. And you say what you mean, and you have high expectations. And most parents that I've ever worked with all have the same, with their young people. They sometimes have difficulties in maintaining that. But I think that we do need to recognise that there are issues of mental health. It's a word that people don't like to use too much. You might want to talk about it in terms of health needs of young people. And you need more support for that. And I think all head teachers, all school leaders that I know are crying out for that support.
Great to speak to you. Thank you. Adam Peter Lang, education consultant at University College London and former head teacher at a London secondary school. Over to you. Why do you think so many children are not attending school? 1 in 5 persistently absent from lessons. Why? You're causing that next. Ben Kentish on LBC. It's 11:20.
This is LBC. From an exotic pineapple plant to a blossoming letterbox rose. Find your perfect plant at Zingplant. Order before 9 PM for next day delivery. Visit zingplant.com. Amazing every time.
Tea time. Just finishing homework. What's a replacement for fossil fuels? Wind power? I've got wind power, especially when I eat beans.
Archie, when it comes to greener technology, trust Sparrow Heating to keep you up to date with the latest innovations for your home. We provide air source heat pumps, photovoltaic panels, and biomass boilers. Plus, we'll help you access any available grants. Visit swellheating.com. Rely on us to keep you warm.
One day, we'll all drive electric. And if you're a landlord with rental properties, a managing agent looking after flats, or a site manager at a business park, shopping centre or similar, you can now get up to 200 individual EV charging point grants, subject to eligibility. Each grant is worth up to £350, but this scheme won't last forever. So speak to the charging point experts, TH Electrics, and start to future-proof your site today. thelectrics.co.uk. Book a survey now.
Supercruises.com, the ultimate cruise booking experience.
Supercruises.com. What's booking is super simple.
Jimmy was chuffed with his new Italian scooter. However, he was even more chuffed that he bought it on his Barclay card. Because when things didn't quite go to plan, he had protection and could claim back on his purchase. You'll be up and running in no time, Jimmy. What you buy is your business. Giving you purchase protection is ours. Search Barclay Card Protection to find out more about how we protect your purchases. Barclay Card. Make money work for you. 28.9% representative APR variable. Subject to application, financial circumstances and borrowing history. T's and C's apply.
Ben Kentish on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
11:22. Let's go straight to your calls. Why are so many children not attending school? What's going on here? What explains it? Is it mental health? Is it kids lacking discipline? Is it school not being fit for purpose anymore? Is it bad parenting? Is it just overstretched parents? What's going on? Tell me. 0345 6060 973. Owen is a new caller in Oxted. Welcome, Owen. Hi.
Hi. So I was just basically thinking about it as I drove my way home. I just wonder if it's something to do with the cost of living crisis since 2019, because basically, if you look at it, it's gone up through the last few years, and I just wonder, like, are people, kids basically looking at their parents and how they're struggling, and then thinking, well, I'm never going to basically amount to anything, I'm going to struggle, so there's no point in going to school because I'm never going to be as successful as my parents.
So they look at their parents, they see their parents having got an education, having gone to school, having got their grades, gone to university, so on, and still working all hours, God send, still just about making ends meet at the end of the month, and they think, why would I bother?
Yeah, exactly. Why would I bother? Because they look up at their parents and they think, like, that's what I want to be like. Mm. And now, with the cost of living crisis, they're seeing that now their parents can't, they can't afford their school clothing, everything like that. And they're just thinking, well, why should I? What's the point? I'm never going to be able to afford my own house. Like, kids aren't stupid. I just wonder if this is maybe a factor.
It's a really interesting suggestion, Owen, because I think what you're talking about really is the rewards, the benefits of going to school are perhaps for a lot of children, and it's interesting that the particular problem is amongst children from more deprived families, 50% of whom, in some cases, are regularly not at school. Those children are struggling to see the point. They're struggling to see the benefit. They're told a myth, go to school, get your education, you'll get on in life. And they're saying, well, hold on, that's not true of my parents, that's not true of my siblings, that's not true of their friends. What's the point?
Yeah, I think if you looked at the percentages, I wonder if the percentage of people that, this 1 in 5 statistic, I think you probably find they were probably coming from poorer households. Yeah. And I think you probably find it was probably coming from around 2019 when this all started.
Yep, well, it's happened in the last few years, and you're absolutely right to say that the problem's much worse amongst disadvantaged households. So on both of those, you're spot on. And of course, the cost of living crisis has a massive impact on parents too. If mum and dad, or mum or dad, isn't around in the morning, isn't around to get the kid out, to get the child out of bed, to get them on the bus, get them into the car to school, then that has a big impact too, because that child will just decide, actually, I'm going to go to school.
Yeah. It's all to do with happiness. If a child's not happy, like, what's the point of going to school? If it's basically like, suffering, like, what's the point of going? If we had basically, if we were solving this problem of the cost of living, then I think you wouldn't have this much problem nearly as much.
The only reason that makes me, everything you're saying makes sense to me. The only reason that makes me, the only thing that makes me question it is, how long do we have to go back to find children saying, I don't want to go to school, what's the point, I don't learn anything, it's a waste of time. That's always been there, hasn't it? That's always been the refrain from the child to the teenager that doesn't want to get out of bed and go to lessons. And yet they were forced to go, and they went.
Yeah, but I don't want to talk about bribery, but basically, like, if a parent can afford to take his kids out on a weekend or something like that, or a nice trip, then he'll the kid will be a bit happier to go to to the school during the week, because they'll know on the weekend I've got a nice time with my family.
Maybe.
Yeah.
It seems to me that it's not just children's sense of school and what it offers that's changed. It's parents. When you talk to teachers, they say parents now just think it's normal, it's fine for their son or daughter not to be in school quite regularly. That's what's changed in the last few years.
Yeah, I'm not saying it's entirely this factor of the cost of living crisis, but I think it is probably does play a significant factor.
I think you've made you've touched on something, Anne, that's really quite powerful actually, and it goes back to what we were saying last week. We were talking about on this show, weren't we, about the number of young people in their 20s, 30s, and 40s having to stay at home with their parents because they can't afford to move out. And we were talking about the social contract, as it's slightly sort of pompously called, that promise that if you just work hard, you get your education, you're willing to put in the graft, you will get on and do well. That's the promise. That's the myth, really, that's peddled to young people. And I'm afraid in many cases right now it's nonsense. There are thousands upon thousands, millions of young people who have done everything they were told to do, done everything that was asked of them, went to school, got the grades, forked out for university, got the first job, worked hard, did well, and are still earning not much more than a minimum wage, still earning barely enough to pay the rent, if they can even afford to rent, still earning in many cases not enough to even get out their parents' house. And in that context, of course, some of the younger people coming up today will look at that and go, hold on, you told me that if I did this, if I went to school, even if I don't like it, I would get on in it, I would make something of myself. That's not true anymore. It's not true. It's a fact. That's not true anymore. That promise is a lie. Is that part of why more and more young people, more and more children are saying, hold on, I'm not going to go. I'm not going to go. The promises that you told me would be waiting there, the rewards at the end of the rainbow if I went to school, they've dried up. They've gone. Oh, and I think that's a really, really powerful suggestion. I think you might be onto something there. Thank you for your call. Owen in Oxford. And Melissa's another new caller in Brighton. Melissa, hi. Welcome to the show.
Hi there. Hi, how are you?
Yeah, I'm good, thank you. Are you okay?
Yeah, I'm good, thank you. I just felt the need to call in because I'm having issues currently. My daughter's in year 9 and I just can't get her in school at the moment. She doesn't really know what's bothering her. It's mental health issues. And I'm constantly in touch with the teachers. I'm going through the welfare officer through the school because obviously I'm aware that her attendance is down and I don't want to get fined for that. But I just think that with all the education cuts to funding and the increase in mental health in young children, they're just too thinly stretched and they don't have the capacity to be able to cope with the demands that they're having from everything that's going on with all the pupils.
The mental health services just can't cope, or the schools.
They can't cope. I mean, my daughter's being referred to CAMS at the moment, and I've been told that the waiting list is 18 months. My older daughter is now in college. She's 16, and she had similar issues in her last year of school, and she just couldn't get any support through the school. So in the end, I had to pay to get private therapy for her, just to make sure that I could get her to a state where she was at least able to attend her GCSEs to get some hope of getting the grades that she needed to get her into college.
Yeah.
And I mean, I was fortunate enough to be in a situation where I was able to pay for her to go private, but there's so many families that wouldn't be able to be in that position. So for those families, they're just totally stuck.
What is it that your youngest daughter's struggling with, Melissa? You don't mind me asking.
I believe that a lot of it has stemmed from COVID. She's almost got it in her head now, well, we were able to work from home or learn from home for 6 months. Why can't we do that on a long-term basis? There's also the usual thing of girls falling out with one another, and she has some anxiety related to that. She also has a health issue that causes issues for her as well, which I don't think the school is able to facilitate and perhaps manage in the best way possible.
Right.
So there's a lot of things going on there. But,
So it's partly she can't go back because of the anxiety, but it's also not wanting to go back, not seeing the sort of value of going back. Is that fair?
Yeah, because she attends a school where it's iPad based, so everything's on iPads. And during COVID, they would set all their schoolwork onto iPads. So she doesn't see why that can't continue to be done.
Interesting. So they got a glimpse during COVID of what homeschooling could look like.
Yeah.
And are now saying, well, hold on, why can't we continue that?
Yeah.
Right.
And the problem I have as well is that I'm torn between. She's a super smart girl, and I know that she will do well in exams and stuff, and I know that she'll do well as an adult. But I'm torn between that thing as a mother to not want to send my upset child into school, and then between the other side of me that doesn't want to get a fine for not sending her.
Yeah. Do you think she'd be better off in school, or do you think she's right that actually she'd be happier and just as well off studying from home?
She's absolutely better off in school. I think they need that contact with other children their own age, and I think they need that social aspect. I think COVID just it made people very solitary, and I think people got used to being on their own, and I don't think that's necessarily a good thing for when you're going out into the workplace. You need to have those social skills.
So, and if you said to her one morning, I don't care, up, out of bed, you're going to school whether you like it or not, tough, this is what I say.
Yeah.
What would happen?
I can normally get her as far as the car park in school.
Yeah.
There's some mornings where I've got more fighting spirit than others, and I will sort of get her to the office, and I'll leave her there. She'll be in tears. I'll leave her with the receptionist or the head of year. I'll go out in tears, and I'll feel awful while I'm at work for the rest of the day. There's other days where I get to the car park and I'll be like, I just don't want to pester these teachers anymore. I know that they've got like 200 other students in that year, just in that year alone. And if you're saying it's like the mental health crisis hitting like 1 in 3 children, that's 70 other children. It's a crazy amount of pressure on the school as well. And there's times where I just like I don't mentally have the strength myself to push her to go in.
I get it completely. It's very easy for people texting and say, oh, parents just need to get strict. But actually, I get it completely. You do your best, but actually when your daughter's crying every day going to school, it's tough. It's really, really tough. I get it completely. All the best to you. All the best to your daughter. Thank you for calling a first-time caller. Really interesting, isn't it? Different reasons that children don't want to go to school. That's Melissa in Brighton. More of your calls coming up. Plus,
am I worried that Israel has taken action that might be in breach of international law? Yes, of course I'm worried about that.
Strong words from Foreign Secretary David Cameron today. Next, we'll speak to a military expert about what the international community is going to do when it comes to Israel's war in Gaza. 11:34 the time. Let's get some news headlines now from Tim Daly.
Ministers say they are actively considering a new law to clear the names of post office workers wrongly convicted of fraud over faulty IT. It's expected Rishi Sunak could announce new legislation tomorrow. Post Office Minister Kevin Hollinrake will talk to Nick Ferrari on LBC in the morning. Some Tory MPs are trying to force changes to the government's Rwanda plan, saying they want to see the current bill toughened up. If adopted, one of the changes would give ministers the power to automatically ignore court injunctions from Strasbourg. And a live broadcast of an Ecuadorian TV station has been interrupted by people carrying guns who made staff lie on the floor as shots were heard. Violence has broken out after a notorious member of a drug gang escaped from prison. LBC weather, spots of rain in the north of England and also the south and the east of Scotland overnight. Clear for much of the rest of the country, though, with an overnight low of -5 degrees.
Weekdays from 7 a.m.
Why the hold-up, Minister?
Straight to the point.
That's the reality, isn't it? Teachers are going to lose their jobs.
Nick Ferrari at breakfast on LBC.
Why does it take 3 years? I could get this done in 3 days.
Listen on your radio and Global Player, the official LBC app.
Hello. I'm currently out of office. An article I read recently said we're more relaxed and more productive after a good break. So, I've gone to Barbados for a month for science. Yours, Toby.
Take your holiday as seriously as British Airways Holidays take your holiday. Atoll protected.
Roll up for an entrance and delight. A marvelingly testicular, wonderful sight. Uncannily, subtly, soothingly sumptuous. Mysteriously, willfully, tongue-twirlingly scrumptious. We see great flavour in your future. Achievements of Boston since 1907.
Comfort, please. Is it true there's a chance to win £250 of the BP New Rewards points every hour?
Yes, every single hour.
Hey again, just a sandwich. Guess who's back?
Oh, midnight feast.
Every hour you get a new chance to win £250 worth of points to splurge on shopping, gift cards and fuel. Scan your BP New Rewards card with every qualifying purchase and you can bring home a win. BP, in for all of life's journeys. Offer ends 26th of February 2024. T's and C's apply. See full conditions at bpnewrewards.co.uk.
Good evening, night riders. This is the lunch train home. Calling you to drop your home every Friday via City Minutes or our final destination, as always, is home.
Plenty of McDonald's restaurants are open late tonight. See McDonald's.com for opening times.
Hi, I'm James Lee, and Mondays are working for me because I've got great people working for me, and I find them on read.co.uk. Take Jeff here. We just hired him to join the team as a web developer, and now he loves Mondays. Isn't that right, Jeff? Don't quit your day job, Jeff. So what are you waiting for? Post your first job at read.co.uk for just £89.
Terms and conditions apply. Please visit read.co.uk for details.
The British Airways original sale has just landed, with hundreds of business class flights, like a New York return for $1799. Now's your chance to switch off before takeoff in one of our lounges, or stretch out in a seat that converts into a fully flat bed. Book your British Airways flights and holidays at ba.com/sale. Sale ends January 30th. Limited availability. Terms and conditions apply.
This is LBC with Ben Kentish. Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850.
11:38 is the time. This from Kieran says, Ben, just like your caller was saying, children can't even look at doctors, nurses or teachers as people who've got an education and now have a decent standard of living. What is the incentive to get on within the system when the state's attitude towards those professions is so derogatory? Different interpretation from Guy in Winchmore Hill, who says, Ben, it all comes down to parenting and discipline. Kids are not being told no. The children today have this self-entitlement about they believe they are only Hello. How are you?
I really feel that COVID was a big sort of reason for some of it for a lot of students, especially those that transitioned from secondary into A-levels, and they probably found that transition very, very hard, just to kind of, I think we all found it rather hard, but I think especially kids and students alike found it quite hard, because being forced into this, sort of almost dystopian time where no one really knew anything that was going on or how to do everything correctly. Zoom was all over the place, and it took us a long time to get used to that. And then almost at a drop of a pin, we were straight back to quote unquote normality. And I think that's affected a lot of students. I was in university when that happened to me, and it definitely affected me. I think it impeded my social ability going into my 30th uni, being when the lockdowns finished. I think that affected everyone's mental health, but kids especially, because it was those developmental years that are so important.
And you think children have sort of still haven't readjusted to normal life since then?
Yeah. I think it's affected them the most out of everyone, because they didn't have much before. They don't know much else, especially for the people that were I would say 14 plus. It was probably quite challenging to then just immediately go back to everything else.
Yeah.
Especially when I was doing my GCSEs and my A levels,
you had Google, and that is a big thing. I think kids nowadays being so tech savvy, they sort of rely on those things, and they don't really see a point in education because of that. They think it's just, it's all there, so what's the point? Personally, I'm at the end of my computer science degree, so I think a big part of this now is AI, and how sort of this probably creates an even larger reluctance to want to learn, or even feel the necessity to do so.
Interesting. Because again, it's what's the point? You read all these studies about, about 50% of jobs are going to be lost to AI, and children are thinking, well, what's the point of getting my education? I think you're closer to the mark, Xavier, when you talk about the emotional element of things. Children feeling that there's something was lost fundamentally during COVID, something was fundamentally disrupted, that their world's changed. Their world's changed, and they're struggling to go back to the world as it was before, is really what you're telling me.
Yeah, I really think it was. I mean, personally, I got diagnosed with severe depression and mild anxiety in 2021.
Right.
And I think that was a direct result of COVID in no small part.
Because of the isolation?
Yeah, because of the complete isolation. And, I think that's the same for a lot of people. I think, even recently, I've heard this being spoken about on LBC, how current students are having the highest amounts of mental health issues we've ever seen.
It's gone through the roof. And it coincides with more and more of them being off school. That's a huge part of it. We're going to talk from midnight about the state of NHS mental health services, adult and children. Just to give you an advance warning, if you've got a story there, 03456060973 from midnight. Xavier, really interesting again. Thank you, sir. Xavier in Denver talking about the impact of the pandemic right now and the impact on mental health. Come back to your calls on that in just a minute. Let's turn our attention first to David Cameron's evidence to a parliamentary committee today, who is pretty outspoken when asked whether he believed Israel had broken international law in its operation in Gaza. He was worried, he said, that Israel had done so. Interesting. Pretty strong words from the Foreign Secretary. Colonel Sam Diggins over you is a military analyst and former colonel in the British Army and joins us to talk more about it. Simon, very good to you. Slightly cryptic language today from David Cameron. He's worried that Israel hasn't broken international law. Is that just a diplomatic way of him saying that he thinks it has?
I think it is. It also follows on from what we've heard from other people. I mean, President Macron called it quite early and said that he was very concerned about the way Israel was conducting the operation, particularly in northern Gaza. President Biden was even more blunt, and he described what the bombing as indiscriminate, which is that's very strong language indeed. And we've also, of course, we've seen South Africa bring Israel to international court over allegations of genocide. So I think that kind of what we've heard from David Cameron is what you might call diplomatic pressure and diplomatic language, but it does have a battle with many other people. Essentially, and I think you have to keep emphasising this, nobody disputes Israel's requirement and need and absolute right to defend itself against Hamas, but the way in which it does it is actually as important. And everyone's been saying right from the very beginning that they must conduct themselves in accordance with international humanitarian law. And the fear is that has not been happening. And you just have to look at the casualty figures. 22,000 Palestinian civilians have been injured. We've been killed. There's over 2 million people have been displaced from their homes. No water in northern Gaza. It's one of those very specific points that Cameron raised, all of which points to a less than discriminate, less than proportionate response by Israel, and that is not acceptable.
It's strange, isn't it? You talk about the South Africa case that's being brought at the International Criminal Court in relation to this. David Cameron said today the UK doesn't support that. It's hard to avoid the conclusion that what he basically said this afternoon was Britain does believe Israel has broken international law, but it doesn't want to see it held legally responsible.
Yeah, it is. It's also very complicated because the very specific allegation that South Africa made is one of genocide. And while we all kind of understand that as the elimination of people, I mean, it is a very specific bit of international law. There's a whole range of other international humanitarian law crimes which Israel could be accused of and no doubt will be in the past. So I think that the kind of view of many people is that Israel probably has not committed genocide, but may well be guilty of other crimes crimes against international humanitarian law. And I think that's why you can have this kind of slightly ambiguous language from someone like David Cameron, who can say, no, I don't think we don't support South Africa and what they're doing, but actually at the same time will still make the point that international humanitarian law may well have been broken.
And just lastly, Simon, is this another sign that patience is running out when it comes to the Netanyahu government, when it comes to the Israeli operation in Gaza, that in the eyes of the UK, the US and other allies of Israel, they're getting pretty fed up with the way this is going?
I think that's right. I mean, right from the very beginning, I mean, a very senior, in fact, he's a former Prime Minister of Israel, and indeed head of their armed forces, Ehud Barak, made the point that whenever Israel has to conduct operations like this, they have what they call a sort of window of legitimacy. You know, there's a recognition that what they're doing is often correct, but there's a limit to what they can do. And I would say that the window of legitimacy has been closing for a while. It hasn't yet been fully, if you like, developed in terms of stopping support to Israel, and America, for example, has continued to supply them. But in terms of the all-important kind of diplomatic support, if you like, the support, the moral support of the international community, I think that's very much in question now. People are saying, we absolutely understand the fear, the horror of October the 7th is still with all of us, but actually how you're conducting the operation does not seem to be matching that. And those kind of words are often being heard from Israelis as well. And as you rightly highlighted Netanyahu, his personal legitimacy is very much in question, and his conduct of the war is in question. Those focused on the hostages, although surveyed, are not so clear at the moment. It still looks like a campaign of destruction and not necessarily about eliminating Hamas as a military force and trying to find a start for a solution for the future, which has got to be political.
Colonel, thank you very much. Colonel Simon Diggins, OBE, military analyst, former colonel in the British Army. More of your calls to come on school absences in a moment. What's behind them? What needs to change to get those children back where they need to be in the classroom? 11:48.
Nick Ferrari at breakfast. Back tomorrow morning from 7. Listen on your radio and on Global Player.
The Fujitsu or Horizon scandal. Do you think Fujitsu should bear the brunt of the compensation payments? Jonathan in Gerrard's Cross.
From a moral standpoint, there's no question. Why have all the errors been in the favour of Fujitsu?
Robert Intelligent.
I am so upset by this. When you think of the pain and anguish that they've caused.
John in Birmingham.
The corporate world has got to be held accountable. This has been going on for 20 years.
Nick Ferrari at breakfast.
With EDF, helping to cut carbon and cost for everyone.
LBC.
Hello. I'm currently out of office. An article I read recently said we're more relaxed and more productive after a good break. So, I've gone to Barbados for a month for science. Yours, Toby.
Take your holiday as seriously as British Airways Holidays take your holiday. Atoll protected.
Get set for the new year and grab yourself a bargain in the biggest ever January sale at Robert Dyer's. We've slashed prices on hundreds of lines. We have fantastic deals on everything from tech to furniture, garden to cast iron cookware, and not forgetting must-have air fryers. So hurry while stocks last. For all this and more, find us on your local high street or at robertdyers.co.uk.
You've arrived at your dream holiday. You got there for less thanks to comparing flight prices on Kayak. Waves crashing gently on the shore, the crunch of sand beneath your feet. This is the life. All you have to do is actually book it. Don't holidays, use Kayak to compare flight prices from hundreds of travel sites and bag a great deal. Search Kayak and go see for yourself.
Meet the Nissan range that makes life pop. Pop with colour. Pop with excitement. All available to test drive at an event like no other. The Nissan Pop-Up event runs from the 16th to the 31st of January. And you could get an extra £1,000 deposit contribution at 5.99% APR representative towards a new Nissan Qashqai, Duke or X-Trail. Search Nissan Pop-Up and pop in for a test drive today. Offer valid until
until 31st of January 2024. Personal contract purchase. Nissan Financial Services. Participating dealers only. T's and C's apply. Find out more at nissan.co.uk.
The British Airways original sale has just landed, with hundreds of business class flights, like a New York return for $1799. Now's your chance to switch off before takeoff in one of our lounges, or stretch out in a seat that converts into a fully flat bed. Book your British Airways flights and holidays at ba.com/sale. Sale ends January 30th. Limited availability. Terms and conditions apply.
Ben Kentish on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
11:51 is the time. Grace is in Ealing to talk more about why so many children, 1 in 5 to be precise, are not attending school regularly. Grace!
Hi, yeah, I mean, it's obviously a really complicated mixture of different reasons, and it's not really helpful for anyone on one side of the political spectrum to say, well, it's all because of this reason or it's all because of that reason. It's clearly a combination of things. I'm very conscious that there are a lot of children elsewhere in our world who would dearly love to go to school and can't because of really severe poverty. And so as much as I hated school most of the time, in spite of having some brilliant teachers, I'm privileged to have been able to go to school because there are kids in our world who can't. And it's really exciting that we can sponsor them, make a difference for some of them, because it's a privilege to be able to have access to education. But I get the feeling of not wanting to go to school because I found school very stressful. I was actually diagnosed with Asperger's or autistic spectrum disorder. But I still had to go to school. There was no question about it.
This is it, isn't it? We can all relate to that feeling of, I really can't be bothered today. But most of us, of our generation at least, and older generations, we just went. Our parents forced us to go.
Yeah, it just wasn't really up for debate. That's just how it was.
Yeah.
And I think so. It's probably the case that people feel differently now because of things like how COVID has an impact and because of technology. I think it is possible for kids to learn well at home, but I think that doesn't necessarily always happen. If they're thinking, I'm not going to go in because I just want to be an influencer later on in life, then they aren't necessarily trying hard to study at home, but some will try hard to study at home. I had to miss almost the entirety of Year 11, the GCSE year, and this was not my choice. I would probably have chosen it because I didn't like school, but it was actually doctors and teachers that decided that I needed to miss most of Year 11 because I was very unwell with anorexia. And I was able to study really well at home and get the grades that I would have, I wouldn't have been able to get better grades, but I do think that it ultimately did have an impact on other things to do with my different mental health problems. I think that being out of school, though in some ways it was less stressful, did actually contribute to other problems. And so I do think that being in school can be really helpful and beneficial. And I worry slightly that though some kids might think, well, I really like to be at home, they might not necessarily reckon with the fact that sometimes doing things that we don't want to do is better for us in the long term.
But that's it, isn't it? You know, when I was 14, 15, I wanted to be out playing football. I wanted to be playing PlayStation. I didn't want to be going to maths and English and physics. But when you're that age, you don't know what's best for you. That's not patronising. I think that's true. And that's why you have parents to say, tough, I'm sorry, of course you'd rather go and play football with your mates on a Friday afternoon, but you're going to school. And it seems right now, for some reason, Rose, that's not happening. You're spot on as well. Really important point. It's not just about the education, the classroom education there, listen. It's about the socialisation. It's about the hanging out with people. It's about the interaction. It's the personal education that you get in the playground, in the classroom too. That's what's often overlooked, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think I've heard a lot of people talking about being on the spectrum as a reason their kids aren't going into school. And people on the spectrum have different. We differ from each other, those of us who have some form of autism. So everyone's different, but I think that it can be ultimately really necessary to be in school if you're on the spectrum. It is more stressful, it's definitely stressful, and you get bullied and all sorts of things, but actually being out of school might not be great either, for other reasons that one might not foresee at the time. It's obviously the case that some people work very, very hard and don't get where they want to, as some of your earlier callers have said, but it is still better to have the education. A lot of things have gone wrong in my life because of my eating disorder, but I'm still glad that I've got the grades to put on my CV from high school. I'm glad that I tried hard and did my best at the time. And I think I'm grateful to teachers for trying their hardest, and I'm worried about how some of these things might contribute to stress for them also, as well
It's
as
a
being
really important point about the impact it has, not just on their educational and their career prospects, but on their psyche, their mental health, their interpersonal skills and so on. Great, it's very cool. Thank you so much. Let's go to Brent in Derby. Brent, I was hoping you might call in on this. Fire away. What's going on? Tell us.
I think it's pretty much well done. You've covered quite a lot of really good points. Two more points I'd like to make. Motivation. I think you're absolutely right about motivation. We have 13 years of a government who have had the opportunity to design an education system which is basically not fit for purpose. What we're teaching the children is as dull as dishwater. Michael Gove's agenda failed. It's failing to motivate the kids. It's overloaded them. We have the most examining children in Western Europe. We're seeing exam stress we've never seen before. The children are just switched off. We have a world now when they've got all the technology in the world. They can stay at home, Fortnite to the house come home, and twist their parents around their little fingers, some of the kids, to be honest with you. And that's the other issue that we've got, is that schools aren't as supported as they used to be. And part of that, again, is the academisation. People have lost faith with the schools. Strikes haven't helped. School buildings hasn't helped. You look at all the news stories coming out of school. It's always negative. You pick up a local newspaper and it's always, my child sent home because of a pair of shoes. My child's not being met their needs. There's a definite undercurrent of dissatisfaction with the whole school system. And that's why you're seeing a growth of homeschooling. The parents are saying, I'm taking my child out for holidays. So, and that, for me, COVID is a convenient scapegoat for what was already starting to happen before COVID. What COVID's done is accentuated it, highlighted the problem, and made it even more worse. It's opened the gap even more. And the worst problem with a lot is the children with the worst attendance are the ones being failed the most, because the examination system, some of those children don't want to go into school because they don't want to feel like they're going to fail, because they're set up to fail. Because the way the system is gamed is that we have children who are just massively disadvantaged by an exam system. So why don't them into school make feel like failure when their needs aren't met? They're just not motivated. It's not working at the moment. We have a massive crisis in the education system. It needs a root and branch. It needs to be a root and branch looked at on the bottom.
Brent, there's a lot in that. There's a lot in that. The first thing you said was interesting, which was about the curriculum. I mean, I understand the point. There was so much that we did at school that was boring, that I thought was irrelevant. I still think was irrelevant. That was tedious. It's not. School has never just been the sort of time of your life. It is boring. It is sometimes mundane, but you do it anyway. But you're saying it's got even more tedious and even more mundane for other children.
Yeah, they haven't been asked, they haven't been involved. It's done to them now. Education's been enforced upon them rather than a choice.
But wasn't that ever always the case?
No, there was a certain buy-in. I look at the GCSEs. I had less GCSEs than the children had to do, and I more choice. Children now have baccalaureate. There's a lot of competition. And what I'm saying in essence is everything's become so competitive. Like basically like the stock exchange. Your success in silver, and a lot of children just know that they won't succeed. So they're hiding because they don't want to. Not say they don't want to face up to, but they're just set up not to succeed. And the education system is not meant to do that. It's meant to be the opposite. It's meant to close the gap, isn't it? And if you look at social mobility, it's getting worse. And education is meant to be the great leveler. And that has to be, and when you couple this with austerity, NHS, which is your next dollar, all of these things come together. Schools are patching up kids. We're trying our best. But we're kind of like the emergency services now. We're just trying to do what we can.
But you're not getting the support from parents because they are also buying into this idea that school doesn't matter as much as it used to.
Well, exactly, and we get thrown under the bus. It's the teacher's fault. And that's the last point that I want to make. There's a massive parallel between sickness rates of teachers and sickness rates of kids, because schools aren't healthy. They aren't healthy. We saw it during COVID, the lack of air quality, the lack of buildings. Schools are, children do get ill at school, but staff also, mental stress, physical health. So we need to look at how we are educating our children, the physical buildings themselves. But even if some schools are overcrowded, that leads to a stressful environment, bullying, aggression. All these things just lead to people. And once a child, the problem is, once it starts to become endemic, a child starts to go off school, they lose confidence. It becomes a rough school.
It becomes a cycle. Brent, it's great to have a teacher's perspective on this. As I say, I was hoping that you would call in. You haven't disappointed us ever. Thank you, Brent in Derby. You're spot on as well, Brent. We are going to talk about a very closely linked issue in the next hour. Clearly, one of the big reasons that many children aren't in school is mental health. We heard just a moment ago, didn't we? We heard about people waiting 18 months. It was Melissa, 18 months just to get mental health support. That in the case of a child. It's the same with adults, in some cases even longer. As a family of man who took his own life just days after speaking to NHS mental health specialists, this today demand change and improvement. If you've sought help on the NHS with your mental health, if you've turned to the NHS and the state in your time of need, your hour of need, was it there for you? What state are NHS mental health services really in? It's pretty poor, I would hazard a guess. How has that played out? What's that experience been like for you? Your calls on that to come next.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at midnight, it's believed Rishi Sunak could make an announcement later today about the government's actions on the Horizon Post Office scandal. The government's known to be considering the introduction of laws which would speed up the quashing of wrongful convictions. The Post Office's former chief executive, Paula Venables, is handing back her CBE, saying she's truly sorry for the devastation caused. Sharon Kerrigan's mother died believing she was guilty of mistakenly stealing money.
It doesn't really mean much. She should have done it anyway. She's only done it after the furore by the public to save face before it was taken from her. I would question her ability as a CEO of any company.
The Post Office Minister, Kevin Hollinrake, will be talking to Nick Ferrari on LBC from 7 o'clock this morning. The Prime Minister could be heading for a new showdown with the right of his party after around 30 MPs put forward amendments for the Rwanda deportation scheme. They want the legislation to be toughened up while it's still going through the Commons. LBC's political editor, Natasha Clark, has been looking at their proposed changes.
They demand Rishi Sunak give ministers the power to automatically block these so-called Section 39 foreign court orders and quash any legal challenges to get those flights off to Rwanda. They say that this group is around 30 top Tories, led by the former Immigration Minister Robert Jenrick, the former Home Secretary Suella Braverman. They've put forward at least 4 amendments tonight.
The CEO of Boeing has publicly acknowledged the company made mistakes following last week's mid-air blowout on a 737 MAX 9 airliner above Oregon. Dave Calhoun says the company will work with regulators to make sure it can never happen again. The RAC is claiming more than 85% of drivers affected by the glare from modern car headlights think the problem is worsening. The motoring organisation says the government should now fund an independent study into the issue. The Department for Transport says it's already strengthened requirements for headlamps to reduce glare. And scientists are warning this year could be even hotter globally than last year was. The EU's Climate Change Service has also confirmed 2023 was the warmest 12 months on record. LBC weather, rain for northern England along with the south and the east of Scotland at times tonight. It'll be clear elsewhere around the UK, though, with an overnight low of -5 degrees. From Global's newsroom, for LBC, I'm Tim Daly.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with Ben Kentish.
12:04 is the time. Ben Kentish here on LBC. Very good morning if you're just joining us on the programme. A really interesting last hour, wasn't it, about some of the reasons that children are not going to school in the numbers that they should be and the numbers that they used to be. And one of the big reasons is that so many of them are struggling with their mental health. Now, there's different views on that. I know there's a school of thought that says they need to get a grip, they need to toughen up, they don't have resilience and whatever that might be. That's a conversation we've had before. But the reality is, whatever you think the causes are, young people today are struggling and suffering with their mental health to unprecedented levels. And that is a big factor why more of them aren't in the classroom. It's not just young people, is it? We have in this country a mental health crisis. The number of children and adults alike that are suffering from a variety of disorders, but particularly anxiety and depression, OCD, eating disorders, PTSD, and very much among them too, among others, has gone through the roof in recent years. It has soared. The statistics are actually quite staggering. I'll give some of them to you a little bit later in the hour. But what it means is that more and more people are needing treatment. And what it means, I'm afraid, is more and more people are needing treatment on the NHS that doesn't exist right now, or at least doesn't exist when they need it, where they need it, and how they need it. Waiting lists, in some cases, over 2 years. Even when you finally get seen, you might be offered 3, 4, 5 or 6 appointments. The state of mental health services in our NHS is appalling. I would say, from what I hear and my experience of this, talking to people, there is no area where the NHS is failing patients and failing this country more than it is when it comes to mental health services. And there's still this sort of ludicrous, outdated idea that that's okay because it matters less. That mental health, it just means you're a bit sad, or maybe you're a bit anxious, or maybe you're a bit down, but ultimately it's right that those services aren't functioning as well as others because it's not life or death, is it? It's not like cancer treatment or cardiology. It's nonsense. This is absolutely a matter of life and death. Suicide has become the biggest killer of men in this country under the age of 40. Eating disorders are killing young men and women and people of all ages. People are taking their own lives because they aren't getting the support they need, including some who have sought help before, many who have sought help before. Today, the family of a man who took his own life just days after being seen by specialist NHS mental health professionals demand change. They demand improvements. Tom Sweeting was 51 years old. His mental health had deteriorated significantly. He ended up being admitted to hospital, West Middlesex Hospital, and being treated. When he was discharged, a junior doctor who had only just started the job was tasked with monitoring and taking care of him and failed, effectively. The investigation later concluded that assessment was incomplete and that the care plan put in place for Mr. Sweeting did fail to meet his needs. Plus, a prescription for antidepressants hadn't ended up where it should have been, in the hands of his GP. Days later, Tom Sweeting took his own life. His partner said he was a brilliant dad and partner to me. We had planned to get married, but it was cancelled during COVID. We didn't have the opportunity to rebook before he died. Tom Sweeting, just one of many, many people not with us today because of the state of mental health services on the NHS. And I'm afraid, and I hate to say it, that there will be more, many more, before this is finally sorted out. It's years now since politicians said we must put mental health on the same footing as physical health. The coalition government, in fact, about a decade ago, promised to do it. It hasn't come close. What's your experience of this? Have you tried to access mental health support on the NHS? And if you have, what was your experience like? Maybe you are someone who had a great experience. You were seen within weeks, you were given all the help you needed, you got what you wanted, you got the outcome you wanted, you're feeling better, all good. Or, and I suspect more people are in this category, or maybe you are one of those that waited week after week, month after month, quite possibly year after year, just to get seen by a specialist. When you did, you were told, OK, you got 5 sessions, they're 45 minutes each, that's all you can have. Maybe you were sent to inpatient care hundreds of miles away from your home. That happens more often than not. Or maybe actually you went to your GP. You didn't even get that far because your GP just chucked you a box of antidepressants and said, go away and take these. That happens too often too. Have you tried to access help with your mental health from the NHS, and was it there in the way that you needed? 0345 6060 973. It's an enormous issue. It's an enormous issue, this. We've got a crisis in our country. We've got an epidemic. And our political leaders would far, far rather spend hour after hour squabbling and arguing about how they might send 200 people to Rwanda than they would dealing with the fact that thousands upon thousands of people, millions of people in this country, are in a very dark place when it comes to their mental health, and the health system that we all pay for that's getting record levels of money because our taxes are a 70-year high is woefully failing them. Not because of the fault of the doctors, of course, but because it's been underfunded and under-resourced, particularly when it comes to mental health, for year after year after year. And if you work in mental health, if you're a doctor, a mental health nurse, you're a clinician, would love to hear from you this hour too. What's it like where you work? 0345 6060 973. If you've tried to access mental health services or you work in them, what's really happening on the ground? Andy Bell is the chief executive of the Centre for Mental Health. Andy, very good morning to you. This is another case. This other case that we're talking about today, Tom Sweeting, shining a light on the dire state of NHS provision, isn't it, when it comes to mental health? Staff are doing their best, but the system is just not in a good position, is it?
It's really difficult, isn't it, to read about examples where someone loses their life that could have been avoided if things have been different. And I think we know that mental health services work incredibly hard day in, day out to meet people's needs, but often with very limited resources. We have seen some investment in recent years, some significant investment going into the NHS part of mental health services, and that's been really welcome. But the need has been growing even faster. And so as the NHS can grow its provision, the needs get greater, and people still find it's difficult to get any support. Families don't say they're not listened to, and someone needs help, but they don't get it until things reach a real crisis point.
It's about 10 years since politicians were talking about the concept of parity of esteem. I remember the coalition government promising that, meaning we will put mental health services on par, on a level with physical health treatments. You should have the same expectations if you've got a mental health problem as a physical one. 10 years on, how far away do you think we are from that having been achieved, Andy?
It feels a long way away, doesn't it? And again, I think parity of esteem, where it's used well as an idea, can be used to bring about real change. That notion that there's no reason why, if you're experiencing a mental health difficulty, you should be treated any worse than someone with a physical health difficulty is a really good and powerful one. But we feel a long, long way away from it. I think recently hearing about the way emergencies are responded to, if you have a physical health emergency, quite rightly an ambulance arrives and takes you to hospital. If you have a mental health emergency, sometimes the police come, and of course increasingly the police are saying we're not responding to as many mental health emergencies as before. So there's a real gap in the system, and I think it's really worrying that parity breaks down when it comes to what people really experience in their lives.
And this is, it's a matter of life and death in the same way as the physical health services are. Again, in this case and too many others, for people who turn to the NHS, turn to their state in their time of need when it comes to mental health, find it's not there and not there in the way they want. And for some of those people, sadly, that is deadly.
Yeah, I mean, in lots of areas, it's fair to say there are good crisis services. There are crisis services that respond quickly when they're needed, and again, they work incredibly hard, and lots of lives are saved every week, every day by mental health crisis services. So where the support works, it can work really well. But I think the difficulty is we know that those services are also very overstretched, and we do see examples of people being kept in emergency departments for long periods of time, and lack of that kind of immediate provision when it's really needed. And of course, if we invested in earlier support, fewer people would find their way into crisis situations in the first place. So in a sense, the way in which our emergency and crisis services are overstretched is symptomatic of actually a much bigger issue.
Are there parts of the mental health services that are doing better than others, Andy? Are there parts that are particularly bad and parts that are perhaps not quite as bad as elsewhere?
I think it very much depends on where you live as to what the priorities are in that area. We know there has been significant investment in mental health services. We've seen particularly, for example, improvements in mental health support for new mothers, maternal mental health services. There are now specialist teams in every part of the country. We've seen over the last 15 years investment in talking therapy services. So for adults with depression and anxiety, you can get access to a therapist very quickly now in lots of areas of the country. So there are areas where we've seen very significant improvement. And it's worth saying, when you invest in mental health care, you get really big improvements. We've just seen very recently mental health support teams in schools. And the evaluation of those shows that where those are in place, which is around about a third to a half of schools, it's beginning to make a difference. So where you've got that support and it's well resourced and the staff team is properly looked after, you can have very, very good care, and in many places we do get very, very good care. But I think we know that particularly in hospital services, inpatient services, it's really difficult to provide good quality of care when we're short of staff. Some of the environments people are working in are not good enough, and there's just far too much need out there for the services to keep up.
And it's a disaster on a personal level. It's a disaster on a national one too, isn't it? Because every person who's not getting the treatment or the support they need, that is in many cases someone off work sick, long-term sick. If it's children, as we've just been talking about it, children missing school for long periods of time. Investment in mental health services would presumably pay for itself many, many times over in quite a short space of time.
We've looked at the economics of mental health a number of times, and it's really clear that if you invest in good early mental health support, it pays for itself, as you say, many, many times over. You see improved school performance among children. You see people being able to stay in their jobs or get into work for the first time. We've helped support the creation of mental health employment services, which are enabling people living with quite serious mental health problems to get paid work and to really find that that's really liberating for them. So we know that investing in mental health is great value for money if it's done well, and where people get the support they actually want and need. It really does make a massive difference, and it's incredibly short-sighted to underinvest in mental health. We know that has huge impacts on physical health services as well. There are lots of people living with long-term physical conditions who also have poor mental health, but if their mental health isn't looked after, then their physical condition gets worse. And again, that's a terrible false economy. You know, you're treating someone with very high cost medications, but not providing basic emotional support. And that costs them and the health service very dearly.
And is the consequence of what we're talking about, Andy, that too often people are being prescribed medication where that might be the solution in the short term, but it's not the long-term solution, and yet for them, that's all they're being able to be offered.
Yeah, and that's really frustrating both for individuals and the GPs doing the prescribing. Mental health medications can save lives. You know, we all know people whose lives have been made markedly better. But as you say, it's a short-term solution that can make a big difference, but it clearly shouldn't be for many people the long-term solution. In some cases, of course, it's very important. But I think medication on its own is very seldom the answer. Every individual needs their own kind of form of support, whether it's from talking therapy, whether it's from medication, whether it's from practical help. Everyone's needs are slightly different, and again, that's why it's so important we have services that are geared around what people actually want and need.
Are other countries doing better than us at this, Andy, or is this a problem that is sort of facing the whole developed world? Are we an outlier on this, or are we just one of the crowd?
I think in some ways we do relatively well by international comparisons, in others quite poorly. I think actually what we tend to see is in terms of mental health services, we are probably doing quite well by most international comparisons. Often it comes down to different areas of the country, actually, and indeed abroad as well. We see some examples in other countries of services that are providing incredibly good support in community settings that barely ever need an inpatient bed. But we also, I think, see increasingly that particularly for young people, it's a mentally unhealthy society, and we're creating mental illness by creating the conditions for people to experience distress, and then having to provide more health services to meet needs that could arguably be prevented.
Andy, thank you very much. As ever, Andy Bell, Chief Executive of the Centre for Mental Health. Is that your experience? Were you listening to Andy talk there thinking, yep, that's what happened to me? Went to the NHS, went to my GP, was either referred for a service that took 2 months, 2 years to actually turn up, or I went to my GP and actually there was nothing they could do. Maybe they could give me medication, but nothing beyond that. 0345 6060 973. What state is the NHS in when it comes to mental health care? If you've experienced it, if you work in it, what's the story? Of course, to come on that in just a moment. 12:20.
LBC. Introducing the new all-electric BMW iX1 eDrive 20.
Bold exterior aesthetics make way for a comfortable interior that features innovative technology to connect you to your drive like never before. With a range of up to 293 miles, now is the time to electrify your dreams. Search BMW iX1 eDrive 20 to book a test drive. Test drive subject to status and availability. WLTP range may not reflect real driving results.
Stop smoking this new year and good things start to happen. You'll feel healthier and be taking the stairs 2 at a time before you know it. You no longer need 12 air fresheners hanging in your car. You'll have more money in your pocket. Your hands get kept busy in other ways, like throwing a frisbee in the park for your kids or someone else's dog. Stopping smoking is the best thing you can do for your health. There's still time to make 2024 the year you quit. For free support, search Smoke Free.
You probably didn't know my dad, Robert, but when he was alive, he made a will and left a gift to Macmillan Cancer Support. It means that in many ways he still lives on. The advisor, helping the patient get a grant to pay the energy bills. Dad did. The nurse, advising the mastectomy patient what to for some blending. It's also easy. Almost a third of Macmillan's vital services are funded by gifts and bills from people just like my dad and you. So search Macmillan Legacy today and help them do whatever it takes.
You could be our next Win Plus winner. Enter now to win big cash prizes and loads more at winplus.co.uk. 18 plus, GB only, T's and C's apply.
Ben Kentish on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
12:22. This is a really important one. Here it says, please just be careful about characterising giving the patient medication early on as chucking medicine at them. Can be absolutely the right thing to do depending on that person's clinical need. Making people feel that getting medication from their GP early doors is the equivalent of getting them out the door is not helpful. It's a fair point, Paul. It's a fair... Of course medication works for many people. Medication is right for many people. I think a lot of people feel they want something else beyond that. Yes, in the short-term medication, and some people it will be enough long-term. But for a lot of people, from my experience, GPs will offer medication and say, I'm also going to refer you for CBT, or I'm also going to refer you to a psychiatrist or some sort of specialist treatment. And that's 2 years or even 3 years in a row, or 18 months at least. And actually, in the meantime, that's what those people really need to get their mental health to a better place longer term. But they have to spend 2 years maybe on antidepressants in the meantime because the waiting list is so long. That's what I mean. That's not to... Absolutely medication works for many people, but for quite a lot of people struggling with their mental health too, it's not enough in and of itself. And the surplus, the extra care they need, is where the problem lies. Let's come to your calls on this. 2 new callers coming up. Georgina first in Potters Bar. Georgina, hi, how are you?
Yeah, I'm okay, thank you.
Good. What made you call in?
Well, I had a little boy a couple of years ago now, so it was 2021. And I had a really bad experience. So I had really bad postpartum depression and kind of psychosis, and I didn't really feel like I had any support at all. So I kind of got to a point after I had him where I felt as though I had awful thoughts, and I just felt like I had no support in any way at all. So I rang my GP and said I feel as though I was quite scared that he was gonna hurt me, or I had some awful thoughts and I couldn't get in control of them, and I just
worried that your boy was going to hurt you.
Yeah,
okay.
I had like postpartum psychosis, and I rang the GP and I said I'm quite worried, and he just said, oh well, there was just no support at all. I don't know, it was just awful.
What did he say? What did he say specifically?
So I rang my GP and I said I'm quite frightened and I had some thoughts, and he just said, oh well, if you feel any worse then go to A&E, and there was not really anything there for me.
Go to A&E?
Yeah, he said if you feel any worse or you think that things are going to get worse, then if you just go to A&E then they'll help you.
What a stupid thing to say.
I know.
Okay, if they get worse, then go to A&E, but what about what you're going through right now? And on that, he had nothing to offer?
Nothing to offer at all. My healthcare visitor was quite good, so I had him and I was okay, and then I started feeling quite depressed. And then my healthcare visitor was more helpful, but I just didn't have any support, and I felt awful. Nobody there, and I'd ring the GP and they weren't there, and there was nothing for me at all.
So when you were feeling most alone, probably in your life, I'd guess, Georgina, and you summon up the courage to reach out for help for the people who are supposed to be there to support you, and actually all that happens is they leave you feeling even more alone.
Yeah, they made me feel more alone, and it was terrible because I'm normally okay, and I felt embarrassed to reach out for help because...
It's hard.
Yeah, it was hard, and I was embarrassed because I felt like I was letting him down, and I didn't understand my thoughts, my feelings. And then when I did eventually reach out to my GP, he just said, "Oh, well, I don't know how to help you, but if you feel worse, let your family might look out for you, and you should go to A&E." And there was just nothing.
Did he actually say that? I don't know how to help you, but your family will look out for you.
Oh, yeah, pretty much, yeah.
Oh, my goodness. This is a trained NHS medical professional saying, I don't know what to do. Hopefully your family know.
Yeah, pretty much. And
God.
I remember, I went back to my mum and dad's house because I didn't really know how he felt. And I remember sort of thinking he might be able to help me. And he kind of said to me, "Oh, well, I understand that you feel awful, but hopefully, if you feel any worse than you do, then reach out to go to A&E. Your family will take you to A&E if you completely lose control and you feel like you don't know what to say."
It's absolutely ludicrous. This is a GP. These are the people who are meant to be helping you with your mental health. So there was no conversation about medication. There was no conversation about talking therapies. It was just, if it gets really bad, go to hospital.
There wasn't really any conversation, no.
And what happened at the end, Georgina? Did it just did you just start feeling better off your own accord? Or what happened?
No, in the end I changed doctors and I had a different doctor and they were slightly better and they put me on some medication, and in a couple of days I felt a lot better.
Oh,
but
of course you did. Did you complain? I mean, that's outrageous to be fobbed off like that.
It was bad, but I didn't know how to. I don't know. It was a funny thing because I've had a little bit of anxiety and things in the past, but it wasn't like that. And then I had my son, and I just felt like I started having strange thoughts. I felt awful, and there was just. I don't know. I think I reached out to I was embarrassed about it a little bit. I reached out to my GP in the hope that they might be able to do something. And he just said, well, there was nothing really there. He just said, oh, if you get your family to look out for you, and then if you completely lose control, you feel really bad.
That's his informed medical opinion, is it? Get your family
to... Yeah, basically, yeah.
But what you're talking about, Georgina, I mean, I say it's outrageous. It is outrageous. It's outrageous in every case, but it's also pretty common. Because, as Andy was telling us, the whole NHS mental health setup seemed to be geared towards once things get really, really, really bad, once you get really desperate, we'll be there. But until then, I'm really sorry, you're going to have to wait.
Yeah, once you completely can't cope anymore, then we might be there for you.
Yeah.
But
when it's far harder to treat, and when it's going to take longer to treat, and when it's going to be more expensive to treat, then we'll be there for you. But if, all you needed was some pills, like in your case, I'm sorry, but go away and talk to your family. I mean, it's staggering. But things are better now?
Yeah, things are much better now. So I changed doctors, and within a couple of days of taking medication, I felt a lot better. But it was just really frightening at the time because, mental health is a funny one, isn't it? Because it's quite hard to understand if you don't go through it. But it's not a case of pick yourself up and get over it, because it's not the way it is. And when you experience that, it's quite frightening when you feel like no one's there for you.
And it's also, it's also absurd to suggest that your family, however loving and supportive they might be, are going to be in a position to help you through psychosis. Of course, they can support you, but ultimately what you need there is medical treatment, as you finally got, and as the GP that you first saw can take absolutely no credit in sorting out for you. Georgina, thank you for your call. It really makes my blood boil, all this stuff. GPs get well paid. To tell someone who's going through that, I don't know what to do, talk to your family, and if it gets really bad, go to hospital. Honestly, come on. Thanks again, Georgina. Really interesting call. Lovely to hear from you. Talk to Jack, first time caller in Cardiff on this. in just a moment. Lots of calls coming in. If you've had some experience recently with the NHS when it comes to mental health, would love to hear your story. Maybe you work in it. Maybe you've got a view. Maybe you're the GP. Maybe you're Georgina's GP or a GP who's got a different perspective on this and wants to get across the difficulties, the pressures that you are trying to work under. 0345 6060 973. Let's get some news headlines before all that. 12:31 the time. Tim Daly.
It's believed Rishi Sunak could make an announcement later today about government action on the Horizon Post Office scandal. The government's known to be considering the introduction of laws which would speed up the quashing of wrongful convictions. The Prime Minister could be heading for a new showdown with the right of his party after around 30 MPs put forward amendments for the Rwanda deportation scheme. They say they want the legislation to be toughened up. And the CEO of Boeing has publicly acknowledged the company made mistakes following the mid-air blowout on a 737 MAX 9 airliner. Dave Calhoun says the firm will work with regulators to make sure it can never happen again. LBC weather, some spots of rain for northern England and also the south and the east of Scotland overnight, but it will be clear and cold elsewhere with an overnight low of -5 degrees.
This is LBC.
With Peloton offering up to £400 off selected Bike Plus and Tread packages, you might go all in with their classes and become a marathon training, shadow boxing, weightlifting, yoga-loving force of nature. Or you may just want to be able to touch your toes. From big sweaty goals to bendy toe-touching goals and everything in between, start strong with up to £400 off selected Peloton packages.
Offer ends 31st of January 2024. Internet connection and Peloton all-access membership at £39 per month required. Terms apply. See onepeloton.co.uk.
Stop smoking this new year and good things start to happen. You'll feel healthier and be taking the stairs 2 at a time before you know it. You no longer need 12 air fresheners hanging in your car. You'll have more money in your pocket. Your hands get kept busy in other ways, like throwing a frisbee in the park for your kids or someone else's dog. Stopping smoking is the best thing you can do for your health. There's still time to make 2024 the year you quit. For free support, search Smoke Free.
Are you into worktops more than workouts? Kitchen islands more than tropical islands? Sounds like you've got a new kitchen on your mind. At Wix, we can design and install your dream kitchen. And now, there's up to 50% off units and up to 4 years interest-free credit on Wix Bespoke Kitchens. Be house proud with Wix. Terms and minimum spend apply. Wix is the credit broker. Credit provided by Navuna Personal Finance.
Find your perfect plant at zingplants.com. Order before 9 p.m. for next day delivery. Zing Plants. Amazing every time.
Ben Kentish on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
Jules text saying my GP has confessed to not understanding mental health issues. What? So I'm 2 years in waiting for a mental health assessment. I mean, come on. If you're a GP and don't understand mental health issues, get another job, frankly, or do some training, because of how many cases are GPs seeing now that are mental health related? Huge number, huge proportion. This from Lisa, Manchester. Ben, I've suffered from clinical depression on and off for over 30 years. The way I keep it under control is through SSRIs, antidepressants, from my GP and a lot of walking, plus yoga. I have tried both NHS mental health services and private over that time, and I don't rate any of them. The only thing is that when you go private, you get to see someone the next day and they can get you on the right medication ASAP. Talking to psychologists and counsellors is a huge waste of time and money for me. That from Lisa in Manchester. Well, it works for many people. And we've had a GP text in. Richard, I'd like to speak to you, actually. Give me a ring, 0345 6060 973. Richard says, I'm a GP, very sorry to hear about Georgina's experience. If that is what she experienced, then I would advise her to please complain. It shouldn't be happening, and it's not the norm as far as I know. That from Dr. Richard. Richard, give us a call. I'd love to hear your perspective on all of this as a GP. Come back to your calls on the state of the NHS mental health services in just a moment. First, let us turn across the Atlantic to get more on a hugely important court case taking place today, relating, once again, you guessed it, to Donald Trump and his prospects of seeking re-election as US President. Lloyd Green is an attorney in New York who previously served in the US Department of Justice. Lloyd, thank you for your time tonight. Great to have you on the programme. Tell us about this case, if you would, and why it matters so much. Good evening.
Good evening. A late good evening to you.
it matters a lot because this is one of those cases that, in addition to being about the prosecution of Donald Trump, is also about the role of the presidency. What are the president's powers? And that was on full display today before the U.S. Court of Appeals for the D.C. Circuit. Trump essentially claimed that anything he did in office, he's immune for once he's out of office, unless he is impeached for it and then convicted for it by the Senate. And if that doesn't happen, he can walk scot-free. They posed a hypothetical to him as to could a president order that the Navy SEALs assassinate a political rival, and his lawyers said you couldn't prosecute the president for it. So that's really what's at stake at this point. It's not just about the prosecution of Donald Trump, but it really has to go to the issue of the idea that no man is above the law, no woman is above the law, and Donald Trump is attempting to make the claim that,
and this is about his alleged attempts to try to overturn the result of the 2020 election. He's saying, correct me if I'm wrong, but his team is saying that because those are actions he took while president, he can't be criminally prosecuted for what happened when he was president, because he no longer is. That's the gist of it.
It's that right. Unless he had been impeached and convicted, which did not happen, and without that conviction, basically anything he did while he's in office is not subject to prosecution.
Right. And if this case is thrown out by the court, presumably it opens the door to all the other sorts of cases that we've seen relating to January the 6th and so on.
If the case is thrown out, it does, in a sense, something different, but also something more. It basically says that the next occupant of the West Wing, the next occupant of the Oval Office, essentially can do whatever he or she wants, and they don't have to even be mindful of criminal prosecution.
It's quite astonishing. But the court, I see, Lloyd, raising some, scepticism, let's put it that way, about some of the arguments that the Trump team were making.
There's definite skepticism from the court. There's an issue as to how far would you say immunity does not apply. There's the issue of, let's say you have a gray zone. What could happen there? Should the president be given immunity or not? Over time, just Republican judges have tended to be a bit more sympathetic to notions of executive privilege, of notions to a stronger presidency, notwithstanding the fact that under the Constitution, Article 1 of the Constitution is directed to Congress. Article 2, only at Article 2, is their discussion of the presidency. So it's one of those things over time where the power of the presidency grows, and yet at the same time, it probably wasn't intended to be that way. Now the question is, what comes next?
And just lastly, when should we expect a verdict on this, Lloyd?
A decision should be coming down, I'd say, within the next... If it came down within the next 3 weeks, it would not surprise me. This has been a fast-track decision. There was an issue as to whether or not the D.C. Circuit, the court that heard this appeal, would take the case quickly. And the decision by the court's panel was, yes, let's take the case quickly.
Great to have you on. Thank you very much for your time. So Lloyd Green is an attorney in New York, previously served in the U.S. Department of Justice. 12:39 is the time. Jack's been waiting very patiently. Jack, thank you. In Cardiff, your first time caller, Jack. Hi.
Hi. It's my dad who's got me into listening to this. I never called before. I thought I would, though, because I've spent nearly half of my life on the NHS waiting list. I'm 18 and I've joined the waiting list in 2016 for PTSD, depression, anxiety, autism and ADHD.
Right.
And I've seen nobody in all that time.
Haven't seen a single specialist in...
Well, the only specialists I've seen have been through my physical disabilities.
Right.
Because I have a rare genetic disorder called Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. And anything that's happened with my mental health has only been through trying to get treatment for my severe chronic pain. And it brings to mind one particular episode where I was in the hospital. I was 2 hours away from home, and I was in hospital because they thought I had something wrong with my spine. I couldn't walk, and I was put in the mental health room because by this point I'd been diagnosed with autism, and I couldn't cope with the environment of the hospital. And the nurses would tell me that my autistic traits were kicking off. They would completely ignore my mental health side, I was there for a physical condition, but they just completely neglected me to the point where they actually lost me on the system. And at that point, I was under 18. And I did complain. I wrote to every single integrated healthcare board in the country.
Good on you.
And I'm still trying to get through to the autism team because the complete lack of understanding is substantial. The NHS is completely on its knees.
Yeah.
I mean, if you look at Ellis Dallos, I was the person who worked it out, same with autism and ADHD, not the doctors.
Really? You had to basically self-diagnose. But what you're talking about, Jack, really is a system that was there to an extent when it came to your physical health needs and has been shamefully and woefully absent when it comes to your mental health.
To an extent, however, it's not there really for physical health either. There was one place where they got me to crawl around the floor making animal noises, which was their idea of physiotherapy. It took 7 years to diagnose my condition, and at the start they told me I was too young to have chronic pain, and by the time they took me seriously, it was too late to do anything. So now I'm on nearly 100 pills a week trying to manage. I can't even go to college, I can't work, I can't do anything, and I'm stuck at home every single day.
It's awful. And you've been on waiting list for 8 years almost.
Yeah, 8 years this year.
And when you call up and say what's going on, it's 8 years. What the hell is happening? What do they say?
Well, they throw out excuses about my name having been changed because I'm also transgender, and that my records are confusing. That it's just taking so long because the system is broken. The money is not being used correctly. It's not. The doctors are not being trained correctly to understand the conditions that people have. It's the government issue. They're just not looking after the NHS in the slightest, physical or mental health. And I'm honestly surprised that it hasn't collapsed or there hasn't been riots in the streets at this point.
I think people are just exhausted, aren't they? People are angry, people are frustrated, but people are just resigned, people are exhausted. 8 years. 8 years in the 6th richest country in the world to get to see anybody about your mental health. It's shameful, Jack. I'm so sorry.
It gets even better because the last hour talking about schools, the reason all of this started, obviously not autism, I was born with that, but PTSD, I was being beaten up in the corridors and teachers were watching. They didn't do anything.
And that's what brought on the PTSD.
Yeah, and then it got worse with all the medical neglect. So I did finally get to see a CBT therapist about a month ago, and they said I'm too complex for it, but they won't refer me on to other things because I need to try it first, even though I've already tried it for my physical health conditions. And one of the therapists that I've seen in the past, they couldn't even pronounce the word triage, and I can understand obviously accents and stuff like that can be an issue, words can be difficult, but I don't understand how you work as a therapist and not know basic medical terminology.
It's just a story of failure from start to finish, Jack. You've been failed by the state, you've been failed by the NHS, it sounds like to me, at pretty much every step, and it's not good enough. And you're right, we can't blame the doctors, we can't blame the staff. They are, I'm sure, doing their best. There are exceptions to that, there are failures that are individual, of course. But this is just a systemic failure when it comes to this country's mental health, and too many people like you, Jack, I'm afraid, are bearing the brunt of it. I hope it comes up. I hope it comes soon. You've been waiting 8 years. Let's hope it's not much longer. Jack, all the best to you. Thank you so much for the call, and I'm sorry that you've had to go through what you've been through. Jack in Cardiff. Quick word with Sandy in Highgate. Hi, Sandy.
Hello, thanks for taking my call. I'm a psychotherapist working in London. What I'm finding is that people take a great deal of time to get to what the National Health offers, which is something like 6 sessions of CBT, as the lady said before, which is wholly inadequate for an awful lot of conditions. What happens then is they won't be offered anything else, that's it. And what they do is they come to private counsellors or psychotherapists, as I am. The difficulty is that we can't keep our prices low because we have to charge back. And I think it's outrageous that the government continues to insist that private psychotherapists and have to pay back on to their patients. So effectively, the revenue of getting money from people's mental health.
That's a fair point, sir. I didn't realise that was the case. What do you charge, if you don't mind me asking?
Very few people do. I charge anything dependent on person's circumstances.
Yeah. And you're seeing mostly people who have tried to go down the NHS route and failed, or not?
No, I'm a specialist in trauma, so a lot of people come to me directly.
Right.
But I see people from the police force and various places who access me in different ways. But it's a real problem, and it's something it's an anomaly, because we're the only profession in medical professions that have to charge that.
Yeah. And when you say CBT isn't enough, is it the fact that it's only 6 sessions that isn't enough? Because it seems to me also that there's this sort of almost catch-all approach when it comes to the NHS. It's CBT or nothing for too many people, and it will work for a lot of people. For others, it's completely inappropriate, and as you say, there's very little alternative offered.
Well, I mean, when CBT was put in place, about 10 or 15 years ago, it was recommended by an economist, fundamentally because they reckoned that it could be quantified. So you can say they've had 6 sessions, it's cost this, and you have to fill in forms and everything, and you've got this amount of progress. But for complex, say childhood trauma, something like that, CBT just doesn't
scratch the surface.
It's not appropriate.
And yet, if you want longer standing, longer term treatment for a mental health condition in the NHS, if you want proper analytic therapy, for example, good luck trying to get it. There are a few centres offering it, but they are very few and far between, and you have to be very lucky or in a very, very bad place indeed to even be considered. Sandy, thank you for your call. I mean, that's a fair point about VAT. I know it's a slightly fringe issue in this discussion. But if there are people having to go to private therapists because they can't get treatment on the NHS, at least the government could do is lower the fees by not forcing those therapists to pay tax on it, isn't it? More calls to come on this in just a moment. Pretty full switchboard tonight on this, which just goes to show the dire state, I think, of mental health services in the NHS. If you've got a story you want to tell, 03456060973 is the number. More of your calls to come in just a moment. It's 12:48.
Coming up at 1 on LBC, Ollie Dugmore. Dugmore on LBC.
Whether you write it on post-it notes,
set alarms on your phone,
or have it tattooed on your arm, don't miss the Evans Halshaw New Year used car event.
With low APR on selected models.
And 3-year service plans for the price of 2.
Search Evans Halshaw online.
Or visit your local dealer in Middlesbrough, where buying your car revolves around you.
Representative 9.9% APR. Restrictions apply. See website for details.
The Virgin Atlantic sale. It's a big deal. Wherever you want to go in the world. Whether you want a big bite of the Big Apple, or to live at large in LA and Las Vegas. And now, even for going big in Dubai. But the biggest deal of all, you can book right now. The Virgin Atlantic sale. See the world differently. T's and C's apply. See virginatlantic.com for details.
Stop smoking this new year and good things start to happen. You'll feel healthier and be taking the stairs 2 at a time before you know it. You no longer need 12 air fresheners hanging in your car. You'll have more money in your pocket. Your hands get kept busy in other ways, like throwing a frisbee in the park for your kids or someone else's dog. Stopping smoking is the best thing you can do for your health. There's still time to make 2024 the year you quit. For free support, search Smoke Free.
This is LBC with Ben Kentish.
Lots of new callers coming in on the phones tonight when it comes to talking about mental health services. Why are they in such a dire state in this country, and how has that affected you? Paul, you're another new caller, this time in Manchester. Hi.
Hi, thanks for taking the time to speak to me.
Thanks for calling in.
I think you hit it on the head. It's in dire straits, absolutely. I agree with you fully on that one. What we're going to do about it, that's the big thing. GPs are so quick to give you antidepressants or, quickly suggest something which is irrelevant to the state of mind that you're in. So you're back to square one. I think employers need to be educated more with mental health issues. I think a bill should be passed by government for employers, because I was working in a job which there was a lot of responsibility. I don't want to really name them.
That's fine.
For obvious reasons.
Sure.
There was a lot of responsibility within the job, and I had a breakdown, basically, which I had to deal with myself. There was nobody to talk to. The duty of care was absolutely disgraceful, absolutely disgusting. And I'm hearing this more and more with people in the workplace. There's nothing, all they're interested in is the targets.
That's right.
And I think the mental health issue, seriously now, we're at a stage people are committing suicide more and more.
The biggest killer of men under the age of 40 in this country.
Exactly.
And of course, not all of those would have been preventable, Paul, but how many of those people would still be here today if the support had been there for them on the NHS?
Exactly. Yeah. And this is what needs to be addressed. It needs... It's worse now than what it ever has been.
Yeah.
And it needs to be addressed urgently. Like I said, a bill needs to be passed where it's recognised employees are trained to spot things with somebody sitting down, have a one-to-one, because if they can nip it in the bud early, then that person can be referred.
I hear what you're saying completely, and yet part of me thinks it's not. Obviously, employers need to be supportive if someone's going through a mental health problem, but they can't fix it necessarily. They're not medically trained, and we shouldn't be kind of asking them to take on the job of clinicians, of doctors.
I agree and disagree. I get where you're coming from. I'm not saying take full responsibility, but it depends on the role that you're in. Say, for example, you're in the fire service.
Yes.
You have a breakdown. You're on a shelf somewhere, and you lose a plot. Basically, because somebody's not identified a problem beforehand, which could have been addressed. So again, this is something that does need to be picked up on. And people trained properly. I'm not saying that they've got to become counsellors overnight, but refer them, stop them working, speak to them, and refer them somewhere.
Yeah.
I think centres would be a good idea, where people with mental health issues can go to these centres and they can sit down and talk, because talking is one of the best things.
They can just turn up.
Yes.
There'd be queues miles down the road, Paul. I mean, I like the idea. I think you're right, but there'd be queues miles down the road, wouldn't there?
Well, the government needs to pull a finger out and set something up. But centres do need to. I mean, what is the answer?
The answer is what you just said. I think the government right now has got blood on its hands when it comes to people dying because they're not getting the support they need, and you're absolutely spot on. They need to pull their collective fingers out and invest properly in mental health services. And they will say, record levels of funding in mental health services, to which anyone with a right mind would say, okay, record levels of demand. And the demand's gone up more than the support for the services. It doesn't take a genius to work out what happens then, does it? 8-year waiting list for people like Jack. Paul, great call. Thank you, sir. Do call in again. That's Paul in Manchester. Chris is another first-time caller in Boston. Chris, welcome to you.
Hello, how are you doing?
Yeah, I'm fine, thank you, sir. Are you okay?
Yeah, not too bad. Yeah, I've been listening to you guys for years and years and years and years and years, and I just thought it's time to ring.
Good man. What made you call in tonight?
Well, first of all, I think that the caller that we've just had on tonight has got a good point. There are some workplaces now which are beginning to take on the auspices, if you like, of being mental health savvy or experts. And in some workplaces, they're offering counselling to people, and it's not really the workplace's place to do that. That's a medical issue, nothing to do with the workplace. And I find that one slightly weird that everybody's suddenly becoming experts in mental health. Since mental health has been on the agenda, which is only actually fairly recently. Mental health wasn't on the agenda and wasn't even spoken about some years ago.
But it's a reflection, Chris, isn't it? The fact that, and it's good that employers are getting involved and being supportive. I'm all for that. But it's a reflection of how badly the NHS is failing.
To a certain extent it is, but it depends what degree of mental health we're talking about. In my particular case, I've had, I think, is it you that had bipolar disorder, you said at one point?
No, not me, Chris.
No, it wasn't you. One of the presenters was talking about bipolar disorder.
I think it's Ian Payne. I think he's spoken about it on air, yeah.
Yeah, I've had bipolar disorder for 30 years. I swing between up, down, left, right, all over the place. Mm-hmm. And I will not have a bad thing said about the NHS. They have carried me through the most difficult times. I've got the same psychiatrist now that I had 30 years ago. And they have been absolutely brilliant. But in order to get there, you have to not just have a bit of depression, you have to have a breakdown where you lose everything. You lose your personality, you become so ill that you can't function, sometimes people become suicidal. I never did. It was the other way with me. I've got something called mixed bipolar. So I had separate emotions that were going on, mixed in with psychosis. Right. If they hadn't have intervened, God knows what would have happened. But since they did intervene 25, 30 odd years ago, the NHS have been absolutely brilliant.
But you had to get to a pretty dark place, Chris, to get to that support.
You have to be severely ill. I'm in a situation now where I bounce between the GP. If the GP can't help, I get referred again. I'm a perpetual outpatient, so I'm always on the outpatient. Mm-hmm. The psychiatrist touches base with me every few months. I have had 125, 150 blood tests, I think, ongoing for the medications that I'm on. So what I'm trying to say is that there are people out there that are severely mentally ill. And there are people out there that are mentally ill with a smaller M.
Yeah. So my worry, Chris, is if you were trying to get into that system today, and it's really good to hear that you've had that continued support, but if you were going to your GP for the first time today rather than 20 years ago, whether your story would be quite different. That's my worry for people today, because I think things have got a lot worse.
You might have a really good point, but I think that one of the problems is that it tends to be different depending on where you live.
Oh, yes, that's true.
I live in Lincolnshire. It's a very rural area. There's not that many people around here. Yeah. It's not built up. The first surgery that I went to when all of this began was a little tiny village surgery in a village called Poynton, which is near Bourne, and it was a tiny little place. And I saw a doctor in there, and he prescribed me antidepressants at first, and the antidepressants made me worse. So by the time I'd gone up there 3 or 4 times to see him, he then referred me. The referral took up a little bit of time, but it didn't take long.
But then once you got in the system, you've had that continued and constant support for the last 20 years. Chris, it's great to hear. It's nice to end on a positive note. Thank you for your call, Chris. Got the X amount of time. I'm glad to hear that things, for you at least, when it came to the NHS mental health, weren't quite in the dire straits that so many other people have reported. Sorry to those of you who didn't get to. Hopefully we'll talk about this again. I'm sure we will. Chris, thank you for wrapping up our conversation. If you've been affected by anything you just heard, if you're struggling with your mental health, just a reminder that the Samaritans are there 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. You can call them on 116-123, free from any phone. That's 116-123, or email jo@samaritans.org. Thank you again for your company tonight. Thank you for all your calls, texts and tweets. I am back with you 10 o'clock tomorrow. Don't forget, if you missed today's show, you can catch up on Global Player. Get that from the App Store or at globalplayer.com. Coming up at 4 on LBC tonight, it's Richard Spur. But right now, here he is, Ollie Dugmore.
Cheers, Ben. Thank you very much for that. Coming up in the next hour, we are going to be talking about the Post Office scandal and Rishi Sunak's planned policy response. What does justice look like in your eyes? And most importantly, who should be footing the bill? Fujitsu, 150 government contracts since the scandal broke, 22 million in profit last year off 1.3 billion in revenue. They've got a pretty penny to spend. It looks like the taxpayer could be the one who ends up footing the bill. What does justice look like? 0345 6060 973 is the number to call on the other side of the news.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 1 o'clock. A senior police officer is warning a rise in the number of children committing sexual offences is being partly fuelled by violent pornography and access to smartphones. Ian Critchley is the National Policing Lead for Child Abuse Protection and Investigation and says youngsters, who are mostly boys, are copying what they're seeing online. He says the trend is becoming more and more common.
There's no end game to this. There is just a continued necessity for us to improve the way we provide a service to the public, the way we provide a caring, compassionate, professional service to victims and adult survivors, and our rigour to bring more offenders to justice, but make sure that we don't criminalise a whole generation of young people.
We could get an announcement later today on what the government's going to do about the Post Office Horizon scandal. Ministers have been meeting with judges to look at how they could quickly quash the convictions of more than 700 sub-postmasters who were wrongly convicted of fraud and theft. The United States Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin is coming under fire after announcing he has prostate cancer. He's being criticised for not telling the White House he was in hospital. Doctors currently say his illness was caught early and the prognosis is good. But LBC's US correspondent, Kate Fisher, says he's not getting sympathy from everyone.
Donald Trump saying that Lloyd Austin needs to be sacked because of dereliction of duty, but also from Democrats saying this is not good enough. If you are a cabinet member to the American government, you need to be accountable at all times, especially given the fact that the US is currently involved in two major wars.
A day after declaring a state of emergency, gunmen have forced their way onto a live TV set in Ecuador. They were seen telling staff to lie down on the floor, shouting they had bombs, while noises sounding like gunshots could be heard. One of the country's most infamous drug gang members has recently escaped from prison. And new research is saying London has the world's slowest city centre for drivers. The technology company TomTom is blaming the introduction of 20-mile-per-hour zones, while a spokesperson for the Mayor of London has described its study as misleading. LBC weather, spots of light rain for northern England and also the south and the east of Scotland overnight, but it will stay clear and cold for most other areas, with an overnight low of -5 degrees. From Global's newsroom, for LBC, I'm Tim Daly.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with Ollie Dugmore.
Evening all, a pleasure to be joining you this Wednesday evening. You're listening to Ollie Dugmore on LBC. It's just gone past 1 in the morning. Coming up on the show at 3, we'll be talking about dentistry, DIY dentistry, and the increasing prevalence of people providing their own dental treatment. At 2, it's David Cameron's remarks today in Select Committee as pertains to Israel and Gaza. But for now, It's the post office scandal and the increasing clamour for justice, what that justice looks like, and possibly, in fact, certainly an announcement by Rishi Sunak tomorrow about the policy response that he's going to be putting forward. Will that mean exoneration, mass exoneration? How will that translate to compensation? We're going to be finding out. So I want to start with that story. I think it's a very instructive episode in British politics, sort of over the last couple of days. It's a story of injustice, a story of class, a story of power in modern Britain. Of course, if you hadn't realised, I'm talking about the post office scandal, the horror visited on the sub-post masters. And I think, like I said, it's deeply instructive because it speaks to how the ruling class are able to get away with possibly crimes, misdemeanours, affronting people who don't have the power to stand up for themselves. You have this entire class, the ruling class, if you like, you can call them the asset class if you prefer to split it by wages and assets, but that class of people, and whether they are the CEO of the post office, the director of public prosecutions, or the post office minister at the time, and subsequently those people, well, it's safe to say, you contrast that, you know, the people in positions of authority during the scandal, they haven't lost out. And if you contrast that with the sub-postmasters themselves, well, it's like chalk and cheese. They're miles apart from one another. Those with the power already have, well, consolidated it. They haven't suffered. I mean, Paula Vennell's the CEO of the post office. Yeah, she's had to return her CBE, but, I mean, come on, let's not cry about it. It's hardly 20 years in a gulag, is it? Meanwhile, the posties themselves, they've been prosecuted, haven't they? And I wonder, actually, if the CBE is a little bit of a red herring, and we should be thinking instead about justice. What does justice look like? I don't think it's the return of a CBE. I think it's more substantial than that. And crucially, actually, if justice means compensation, who's footing the bill? Is it you? The taxpayer? Is it Fujitsu? If the government foots the bill, you'll be the one who's paying. 0345 6060 973. What does justice look like in this scandal? You can text 84850 or tweet me at LBC. Earlier, my LBC colleague Nick Ferrari was joined by Work and Pensions Secretary Mel Stride, who was on the morning round to answer questions on the government's response to the Post Office Horizon scandal. Have a listen to what Mr Stride had to say when asked this question by Nick on the issue of who should foot the bill when it comes to paying for compensations for victims impacted by the affair.
You rightly point to the £138 million that's already been provided by the government. I assume that comes from you, me, taxpayers, my listeners, the good folk of Central Devon. Can I put it to you, Secretary of State, shouldn't it be coming from Fujitsu, which this morning is valued at £58 billion?
Quite possibly, some of it, and what Kevin Hollingrake said yesterday in his statement to the Commons was that it won't necessarily just be the taxpayer, you and I and my constituents in Central Devon, as you put it, that are on the hook for this money. We've got this public inquiry underway, and one of the things it's going to look at, Nick, is where does culpability lie? Who is responsible? Who knew what when? Who did things they shouldn't have done, and so on? And to the extent that that culpability rests upon the shoulders of others than government, then I think you can expect ministers to come to the appropriate conclusions, and perhaps it won't be just the taxpayer that is on the hook for those costs.
I think it's certainly worth looking at the IT provider of the Horizon system, Fujitsu. 150 government contracts won since the scandal surfaced. 22 million last year in profits, off revenue of £1.3 billion. But the posties certainly haven't been exonerated, and that for me tells you all you need to know. Keir Starmer, now a Knight of the Realm, director of the public prosecutions at the time. I know lots of people have been asking the question about really what kind of role he had, because, you know, well, it's a hangover of being Royal Mail, the Post Office, but actually was able to and has been able to, for 300 years, carry out its own prosecutions and take them all the way up to the Crown Court. It doesn't need, you know, the CPS, the police's involvement at all. And people say that kind of removes Starmer from the equation, but I'm not really sure it does. And to be clear, I'm not apportioning any blame here. It's more of an open question, if I'm honest with you, about his involvement or lack of involvement in this. Because the Prosecution of Offences Act 1985, there is a provision for the DPP to intervene. and take over prosecutions that are being conducted privately. It's Section 6.2, for those of you who are interested, the legislation nerds out there of this Act. That's what it provides for. And like I said, it's an open question because this side of the story has been in the media. It's been in the political class, really, since it was first reported in Computer Weekly in 2009. Private Eye's been talking about this since 2011 or 2012. Certainly, 12, 13 years they've been plugging away at this. Ian Hislop will tell you he's been putting it in basically every single issue. I think there are plenty of outlets talking about it, and some MPs have been talking about it as well. It's not like he didn't know that it was going on, Keir Starmer, that is. Although I have to say the contrast between the attendance of the MPs in the chamber before and after this TV drama aired on ITV is quite damning. There's a photo you can see of them in 2022, and there's about 3 of them in there, as opposed to this most recent one when it's looking pretty full. And I find that thoroughly depressing that it takes an ITV drama to get them all in there, wanting to be seen to be talking about it. So, what's Starmer's role there? I'd just like to know the answer to that question. I think it's a valid question for him to be asked and hopefully provide a full answer to. But that's the Director of Public Prosecutions at the time. He's now a Knight of the Realm and the leader of a political party. The Post Office Minister at the time, well, that would be Sir Ed Davey, also now a Knight of the Realm, leader of the Liberal Democrats. And it's not as though Ed only heard one side of the argument, although I suppose he did only hear one side of the argument, actually, because it's the only one he gave any credence to, but perhaps by will, ignoring or omitting the view of the sub-postmasters in the scandal, because he was written to about this. He was written to about it. And also, it's your job as the minister, isn't it? If you're being told X about Y, it's your job to consider Z. Surely. To at least entertain the possibility. And he kind of, I think he fell for the groupthink that sort of polluted and characterised this entire scandal. That the Horizon IT system couldn't possibly be to blame. And I'm aware, sort of, Davey gets a lot of flack for this. But every single Post Office minister since him, has found out more and more about this scandal and similarly done nothing since. So I actually think the weight of responsibility weighs heavier perhaps on them than it does even on him, on those Conservative ministers that followed him, than it does him. Fujitsu, as well, the IT provider in question, they've won, like I said, 150 government contracts since. Operating revenue of 1.3 billion. 1.3 billion in revenue in the last year, 22 million in profit. They're still making money. They're still getting government contracts. So, the CEO of the Post Office, Paula Venables, she hands back her CVE. Director of Public Prosecutions, he's now a Knight of the Realm, leader of the Labour Party. Sir Ed Davey, the Post Office Minister at the time, he's now a Knight of the Realm and the leader of the Liberal Democrats. They haven't suffered, but the posties have. They haven't been knighted, have they? Yeah, I suppose there's still time. I think if this was just a standalone example of a miscarriage of justice, if this was out by itself, we could take solace in the fact that it's a one-off. But actually, I don't think it is. I think it's a pattern of behaviour. I think it's representative of something much deeper, much broader in our society. It's systematic almost and consistent within the ruling class. There's some kind of scandal. How do they respond? Oh, we'll have an inquiry. We'll kick it into the long grass. We'll deal with it. And the truth of the matter, when they're way, way, way beyond the longevity of their political careers, when all this is over, we'll worry about it then. Take your pick. Chilcot, Allgreen, Hillsborough, all examples. The little guy gets ignored, made to carry the can. Piper Alpha, more than 160 men died in that oil rig explosion in 1988. More than 160 men. 30 of their bodies never found, never recovered. No one went to prison. Who is in prison as a result of the Grenfell Tower fire? No one. We just accept that 72 working class people died in the fire, and it's terribly sad, but what can you do? We just accept that those workers died in an industrial accident, like I said, on the oil rig. We just accept that Tony Blair, and I mean the results of the Chilcot inquiry kind of got subsumed into the Brexit referendum, didn't they? Because they published so close to the polling day. But nonetheless, what justice? Who's responsible? Well, certainly not whoever's in charge, that's for sure. You can be sure that Rishi Sunak's going to deny all knowledge, can't you? When he was giving evidence to the COVID inquiry, I can't recall. Sounds a little bit... We make a lot of Joe Biden being senile, allegedly. The Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, current Prime Minister, can't remember something that happened 2 years ago when he was Chancellor of the Exchequer. It's not great, is it? I'm sure he'll remember when it comes to writing the memoir. I'm sure he'll remember when it comes to the after-dinner speaking tour. Where's the WhatsApps? Doesn't matter. Don't ask. I've changed phone. No one changes phone as much as the Prime Minister does. And this is the point, isn't it? It's a mechanism for deferring justice. It's a mechanism for sort of taking the anger out of a situation. So when you look at the Post Office scandal, what does justice look like? What does it need to look like? And most importantly, who should be footing the bill? 0345 6060 973. You can text 84850 or tweet me at LBC. You're listening to Ollie Dugmore on LBC, and the time is 1:15.
This is LBC.
Your new Mercedes-Benz is closer than you think. We're offering 0% APR representative on selected electric cars. All include 12 months of Mercedes Me Charge, giving you discounted public charging. And any energy used will be replaced in the grid with renewable electricity. Order your new electric car today. Offer ends 31st of March 2024. Subject to availability. Exclusions and T's and C's apply. Mercedes-Benz Finance. See website for charging and renewal terms.
I didn't think I could do it at first. Me? Fostering. But then I look back at what their life was, how it is now, and the future that lies ahead. It's the best thing I've ever done.
In the North East, we have great foster carers, but we need more. There are 6,000 children and young people in care across our region. By sharing your home with a child in need, you can make a real difference in a young person's life. Search Foster with North East today to find out more about how you can become a foster carer.
Happy New Home!
Thanks! I'm so chuffed I finally got my own place.
How'd you do it?
When you buy a new Persimmon home, you could get up to 20k to spend your way. I boosted my deposit and even had some left over to throw a party for you lot. If you're still looking to sell your place, Nick, Part Exchange Plus means Persimmon could buy your home and give you up to 10k on top.
Now that would get me moving.
Sounds like another party's in order. Make a smart move with Persimmon Homes. Selected plots, conditions apply. Visit persimmonhomes.com/it's-possible.
Find your perfect plant at zingplants.com. Order before 9 p.m. for next day delivery. Zing Plants. Amazing every time.
This is LBC with Ollie Dugmore. Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850.
Mido texts in 84850 and we'll join that conversation. There is no such thing as justice in the UK. Was there ever justice? I guess that's provoking a broader sort of philosophical, ethical question on this about what that means. What does justice mean? And I put that to you, actually. I open it up to you. Not necessarily enough philosopher to be able to provide you with the answer, but I don't think it looks like this. I'll tell you this, Mido, I don't think it looks like this. Story today in the Financial Times. The UK government awarded billions of pounds of contracts involving Fujitsu and Rishi Sunak's watch after the Japanese company's software was found to be at fault in the Post Office scandal in a landmark 2019 court ruling. And this is what I'm getting at here, actually, because when we talk about compensation for these people, when we talk about paying sub-postmasters back, and that figure, by the way, something it's been touted they might get £600,000 flat fee each. And you might think that sounds like a lot. That doesn't cover it. There's people who lost north of £1 million. There's people whose lifetime earnings have been affected by this. You have to consider, actually, £600,000. 25 years ago, this happened to you. What we're saying that these people only been affected to the tune of 24 grand a year. It doesn't stack up. So what was I saying about Fujitsu? Government procurement records show Fujitsu was involved in £4.9 billion of solo and joint public sector contracts after the December 2019 ruling, including £3.6 billion during Sunak's time as Chancellor and now Prime Minister. So either the government puts the bill, in which case you'll be paying as a taxpayer, and even if Fujitsu puts the bill, in a way, in a roundabout way, you're still possibly paying, because you're the one, it's your money, your taxpayers' money, that's footing the bill to these contracts and handing cash over to them. Is that what justice looks like? You can't do that, surely. 0345 6060 973. Rob's in Maidstone in Kent. Rob, good evening. What would you like to say?
Ollie, we've reached the Panto villain part of this saga. So we have a nice drama. We're all present that evil woman over at the post office, and it's Ed Davies because he didn't do his job, and let's worry about Keir Starmer as Director of Public Prosecutions, who would have required a referral for him to step in, rather than understanding the underlying systemic stuff is that the Tory party has systematically removed the access to justice from the working classes over the last 14 years.
Go on.
They have cut legal aid. They took away funding from legal aid solicitors. They have closed magistrates' courts. They have made it so difficult for any working class person to have access to the legal help they need to actually get a case even running.
Listen, I hear what you're saying, Rob, and obviously legal aid is actually, and the problem in the justice system are deep-rooted, sincere, serious, and really worthy of consideration. But I think I'd be doing, those involved in sort of disservice to say that this is to do with the post office, isn't it?
Oh, yeah, no, absolutely, but it's not just the post office. I mean, you look at the amount of money that's being paid out by the NHS to private companies because they can't get you can look at all sorts of stuff that is about the way our legal system has been twisted for the benefit of the rich.
There's a really damning line actually in the drama where one of the lead characters says, I've been called to court, but I'll just represent myself.
Yeah.
I'll just deal with it myself. And you, obviously your head's already going to your hands thinking about the sort of, the million pound lawyers that he's going to be going up against and despairing at the prospect of that. But there is an imbalance, isn't there? And it kind of, I guess, it does provoke those questions about the social contract, right? About the provision of basic services and the place of something like legal aid in our justice system.
And I'm sure you've read The Price of Inequality. One of the prices of inequality is that the judicial system doesn't work for ordinary people. Because we do not have, when the lawyer turns around in that drama and says, you need 500 people before I can find somebody who will privately fund this for you. You go, well, hang on, that's obscene. How can it be that a citizen in this country cannot take out a case and see it all the way through and get the correct legal support? I mean, it is obscene in the sixth wealthiest country in the world that most of these things are done on a settlement where no true justice happens. We hold nobody accountable. I mean, every post office minister since Ed Davey should be taken to task. Any honour they've taken should be removed and they should be publicly shamed.
Go on. So what does justice look like to your mind then, Rob? When you say they should be publicly shamed, are we calling for them to be cancelled? What do we?
No, I'm not talking about them. No, because I would never don't cancel people because they have an absolute right to their free speech, but they do not have a right to be rewarded for the failure and the crimes they have put onto other people. I mean, you think about the banking crisis. It was ordinary working people who took all of that debt onto themselves. We rescued the financial sector. Not a single bank executive or trader went to prison. Not one, having destroyed the lives of millions of ordinary people. And I'm sorry, it's something I get quite passionate about. Now, I'm an old man. I've agreed 60. But I've seen this my entire life. And it's just getting worse.
Well, that's interesting to hear you say that, because initially it sounded like you were sort of pinning the blame on sort of the most recent Conservative government in the last 13, 14 years of it. But you think it extends farther than that?
Oh, much further back. You look at what Thatcher did with the union. One of the things that unions used to do really effectively was that they used to be able to give information to their members and put them in contact with lawyers and help support them when they were taking cases against companies who were abusing workers' rights. What have we done over the last 40 years? We have stripped workers of their rights and we've given all the power to corporations. We allow corporations to negotiate with the taxman about how much tax they will pay, while working people are taxed to the absolute hill.
It's not optional. Rob, what do you make of the fact that this is sort of the Westminster commotion around this is a product of this TV drama, right? And on the one hand, I'm kind of sat there thinking, well, you know, if it gets more attention, if it increases its publicity and increases the sort of attention that gets paid to it, that's not necessarily a bad thing. But on the other hand, you're kind of sat there going, this is... Private Eye have been banging on about this for years. You know.
Yeah, and they're not, the Parliament is not responding to the actual crisis. They're responding to the drama and what has gone on from there.
What do you think that speaks to, then?
That speaks to the short-term nature of our politics. It sorts to the fact they want scapegoats so that they can try and wash their hands of it. I mean, there are questions to be asked. I mean, we've all had this go about the CEO giving back a bloody honour. Where is the IT director? Where is the procurement director who signed those contracts with Fujitsu? Where are the people who are meant to be overlooking the governance of those contracts? Where is the board that didn't ask questions about this? Where was the analysis of what was coming through those call centres?
Do you know who didn't feature in it, Rob? Is the chairman?
No.
Chairman of the Post Office, and it might have something to do with the fact that he's an executive at ITV now. Who knows?
Well, if you have to be frank, that revolving door's going on forever. And I would just say, Ollie, if you watch the COVID inquiry, exactly the same thing happened. So I was watching the COVID inquiry before the big beasts arrived. So I listened to scientist after scientist and statistician after statistician telling how we weren't ready, how they've been warning, how they tried to get information through the system. But what we had was front pages of, I don't recall, and where's my WhatsApp message? We do not actually get stuck into what is wrong systemically here.
Do you think the inquiry is a vehicle? I'm not saying specifically the one in relation to the Post Office, and I'm not saying specifically the one in relation to COVID, but broadly all of them. That it kind of serves as a deferral tactic. It kind of works to obfuscate and delay, and means that no one has to sort of face the music. It's one of the peculiar quirks actually of the COVID inquiry is that because of the sequencing of the modules, they've managed to get the current Prime Minister in the dock. Usually, when you look at an inquiry like this, it takes so much time that everyone's political career is kind of over, so they're freed and able to be honest about something.
Well, what I've noticed about that, and I've been around long enough, with anything from the Stephen Lawrence stuff forward, is that we have these inquiries, we find out stuff we already do, we then find out it's much worse than we do, and then we all question what the findings of those inquiries were. And that's the bit that always gets me, because we set them up, so these are going to affect the change that is required, whether that be Baroness Casey looking at the Met, whether it be Hillsborough, and how many inquiries did Hillsborough go into? But you go, if these things were truly for the citizens of this country, when those recommendations came out, a government would not have a choice about whether it may or may not take those into legislation at some level. Because what they do is they consistently go, yes, we've read the report and we accept and treat all these things, but then they don't make the changes required. When the chief of the Met could say after Casey, well, I don't believe we're institutionally racist. Well, I don't really care what you say. The person who was doing this inquiry has got the evidence and has come to this conclusion, and that's what she was being paid for.
I know you said you thought the sort of the CBE was a little bit of a red herring, but just finally, Rob, do you think that Alan Bates himself was deserving of some kind of recognition or honour, or are you just sort of the view that the honours list is a waste of time regardless?
Well, let's be frank, I don't believe in the honours system at all. I think it's been completely corrupted, and we should have no place in a modern society for that level of patronage. But I think that Alan Bates has done something far more significant, and I hope he understands this. He has shown everyone in this country that when you can get together with a community of people who've been offended, you can get justice. Because the greatest thing he did was create a collective.
Rob, thank you for your call. Lovely to talk to you. We're engaging with the idea of what justice looks like. You know, what is Rishi Sunak going to announce tomorrow? What do you want him to announce tomorrow? And actually, I think most importantly, would you be happy to foot the bill? Are you happy to pay for the Post Office's incompetence? Because that's potentially what could happen. 0345 6060 973. You can text 84850 or tweet me at LBC. You're listening to me, Ollie Dugmore. The time now is 1:30, and that means it's time for the news headlines with Tim Daly.
A senior police officer is warning a rise in the number of children committing sexual offences is partly fuelled by violent pornography and access to smartphones. A study showing half of those suspected of child abuse in England and Wales in 2022 were also under 18. We could find out more later about the government's next step on the Post Office Horizon scandal. Ministers have been meeting with judges to look at how they could quickly quash convictions for fraud and theft. And the United States Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin is coming under fire after announcing he has prostate cancer. He's being criticised for not telling the White House he was in hospital. LBC weather, light rain for northern England, the south and the east of Scotland as well overnight. Dry and clear, but cold as well for much of the country, with lows of -5 degrees.
This is LBC.
I didn't think I could do it at first. Me, fostering. But then I look back at what their life was, how it is now, and the future that lies ahead. It's not always easy, but it's the best thing I've ever done.
In the northeast, we have great foster carers, but we need more. There are 6,000 children and young people in care across our region. By sharing your home with a child in need, you can make a real difference in a young person's life. Search Foster with Northeast today to find out more about how you can become a foster carer.
Just checking in, Money Super 7. Are you on the case?
All under control.
Where on earth are you?
Sorry, boss. Just testing the new rewards. We're giving customers a year of 3 days out worth £160 when they save on their car insurance, broadband, and more. Like the zoo.
Well, keep up the research.
The Super Safe Club from Money Supermarket. Seriously rewarding. Qualifying purchase with an account. 3 days out via app. Value based on one visit monthly. Average ticket £13, October 23. 17 plus, UK only. See site for terms.
The Steakhouse Stack. With 2 beef patties, crispy onions and peppercorn sauce. It's the kind of McDonald's you take photos of to put pride of place on the mantelpiece. Sure, you'll need to make room, but you remember what your wedding day looked like. The Steakhouse Stack. It's McDonald's, and then some. Available until the 6th of Feb. Served from 11 a.m, subject to availability. Participating restaurants only.
You could be our next Win Plus winner. Enter now to win big cash prizes and loads more at winplus.co.uk. 18 plus, GB only, T's and C's apply.
Ollie Dugmore on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
We're talking about the Post Office scandal, this extraordinary miscarriage of justice that's seen more than 700 sub-postmasters facing prosecution via the Post Office for committing no crime. And I mean, if you haven't watched the ITV drama, you really should, because it's emotional, it's provocative, and it's frustrating and upsetting in equal parts. And I'd like to know what you think justice looks like, if justice could be served, what it would look like. Is it mass exoneration, which I think is a slightly tricky one, right? You know, typically you would say you can't pursue something like that, because what if one of them actually did have their hand in the till? What if one of them was actually stealing and you exonerate them? I think that's a fairly simple calculation, to be quite honest with you. Far better, I think, that one thief runs free and gets away with it than you have hundreds of people wrongly condemned and tarnished. I think that's I don't think there have to be a manual count to work out utilitarian calculation on that one. So what does justice look like in this case? Is it compensation? Is it exoneration? You can call 0345 6060 973. You can text 84850 to LBC. And actually we can kind of, widen it out a little bit, actually. And if you sort of, this is your opportunity, I guess, that if you think that there's another injustice that deserves more coverage, deserves more conversation and discussion, bring it forward. What would you like us to be talking about? 0345 6060 973. Who else, apart from the postings, needs our support, needs an ITV drama to be written about? I mean, I'm impressed, to be honest with you, that they got a commission in the first place, because it's not exactly the most sexy subject matter, is it? IT system failure in the post office results in thousands of pounds being incorrectly accused of being stolen. I know it's a miscarriage of justice and it's hypocrisy, but it doesn't scream ITV prime time, does it? Traditionally, those sort of shows, well, to be blunt about it, it's usually true crime, isn't it? It's usually something about some poor woman who's been murdered, some kind of nonsense in that sense, but it's not. It's rarely sort of a political situation like this that's so hard-hitting. It's usually something that's so confronting and upsetting, like true crime, but not necessarily sort of a type of story like this one. And it's impressive, actually, that they did and have got it to the situation that it is. I wonder how much of a struggle it was. You know, Computer Weekly first wrote about this in 2009. It's taken a long, long time to get here. And actually, I'm kind of frustrated, I think, by the sort of our media ecosystem, which means that it takes a TV show like this to put it front and centre, to get people talking about it. Robert's in Gateshead, near Tyne and Wear. Robert, what would you like to say?
Well, the thing I was getting at was everybody's been going on. I've been listening to the conversation for a while, and everyone's going on about who's responsible, who's going to be prosecuted, who's going to be taken to court. And they're having a debate today in Parliament about what they're going to do to make sort of exonerate people.
So what does justice look like for you, Robert? What would you like to see happen?
What I would like to see happen is the head of state, King Charles, come out and give a public pardon.
That is one of the ways they can exonerate them, right? It is one of the mechanisms.
Well, I mean, you've got the means and the motive to sort of find out if it's actually constitutionally possible for the head of state, King Charles, to give a royal pardon to all these people.
Do you think that's likely?
I don't think so, because everybody's going on about the CBEs and honours system and all the rest of it. But what I did here before was everybody's going on about the little people are being downtrodden by the system. And if King Charles wants to upgrade the monarchy and make it relevant to today, there's a thing for them to do. Give a royal pardon.
Do you think they need a bit of positive PR? Do you think the royal family is in need of a feel-good news story?
Yes, we really do. I mean, I'm not an anti-monarchist or a monarchist, but...
Well, you must sit on one side of it, Robert. Come on. You must have a view.
I've got a view. I'm not for the monarchy, but I don't think it should be abolished just yet.
Okay. Oh, that's interesting. Why?
Because there's things... I mean, there's a thing I've just said to you. It's relevant for him. He could actually take action on his own as the king to exonerate and give people a pardon to make things right.
And what do you make of this point about financial compensation, Robert? Because it's one thing to say, isn't it? You know, we can exonerate these people, we can expunge their records and make good in that sense, but it's actually it's quite far removed, isn't it, to then actually have to give them financial compensation, and possibly, you know, there's a real risk of that money coming from the taxpayer.
Well, what did we pay for the PPE scandal again? 28 billion for stuff that didn't work.
I don't know the total figure for all of the contracts, but I mean, it's in the billions. Yeah, there's a multitude of them.
It's into the billions, and then we've got the ETS2. Don't forget that when they scrapped the northern leg of ETS2, they saved £42 billion. There's some spectacular.
So you're actually saying you are happy for your money to be spent on this?
Oh yes.
Really?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I'm not one of these people that thinks, oh, why do we have the NHS? Why should I pay for someone who's sick in hospital?
Yeah, but I totally accept that point. But this is, I mean, it's not really a direct comparison, is it? Between sort of, you know, the provision of the welfare state and this, which is a scandal in a privatised company.
The people on the ground, Ollie, the people on the ground pay more tax than the rich people. But they always tell you, pro rata, the rich people pay more tax than us. Not as a percentage of income, they don't.
So you genuinely would like to see your taxes going towards bailing out, not Fujitsu, the people who provided the IT system, not the post office. You
compensate the people who've been victimised and vilified by a system that took them to court, took away their livelihoods, in that public esteem, I mean, don't forget there was one there that said they came into our shop and spit on the floor because they thought she was a thief.
Yeah.
What compensation can you give someone for that?
There's an really upsetting part in the series.
People at all. Tax me more.
You'd happily pay for it?
Absolutely.
I mean, you're a very kind person. I genuinely didn't expect anyone would have that point of view.
I am not an outburst, no. I believe that when you see an injustice, someone should pay. If we can do our bits to help these people, that's a civilised society.
But
that's what I like to call it.
It shouldn't necessarily be you, should it? I mean, fair play to you, obviously, but you're not culpable, are you? You're not responsible for what happened.
But why do we have charitable organisations to help people who are less well off than us?
Do you think there are many other people who think similarly to you, Robert?
I do, actually, yes.
Do you?
These people have had everything taken away. They've been trampled on by the system. They've lost everything. Their families have been penalised and vilified. What compensation? How would I feel? I would want somebody to help me.
It's very compassionate of you, Robert, to be honest with you. What do you make of this point about the media side of this? That it's taken the TV show to sort of put this front and centre. What do you think that speaks to? How does that make you feel about our sort of media ecosystem?
They've latched onto something else to make themselves look good.
Go on.
Rishi Sunak's going to have a debate tomorrow about what they can do to exonerate these people and speed up the compensation process. Grenfell Tower, 6 years later, no money.
No arrests, no prison sentences.
Windrush, 100 people plus have died with no compensation for a scandal that the government put them through.
Four people, four of the sub-postmasters have killed themselves in the time this has been going on.
Yes. And there's more people coming to the fore now because they've realised they didn't know that they were not just the only ones. They didn't know there were so many thousands more families. It's all going to come up now, but Rishi Sunak's jumping on the bandwagon again.
Do you think he's that cynical? Do you think he's that cynical?
Absolutely, without a doubt. Let's protect the party.
If we extend sort of, if we're generous, if we're as generous as we can be, and we say, okay, maybe this wasn't front and centre of his agenda. He's had the small manner of a pandemic. He's had the small manner of a cost of living crisis. He's got to do. He's had some other issues on his plate, and it's taken the ITV drama to put it on the front pages, to put it on at the top of shows, like the one you're listening to now, and get that conversation going. And as a result of that, he maybe wasn't aware of it, but now he is. You don't think that's the case? You think it's just complete cynicism?
Absolutely. I'm so sorry about this, the way this government has run the country, because it's all about saving the party in the prospects in the next election. It's all about saving the people that's been vilified and taken to court and prosecuted by the government. Very cynical.
Robert, thank you for your contribution. If you want to join the conversation, you can call 0345 6060 973. What does justice look like to you in relation to this scandal? And on that point about cynicism, Lorraine texts in, Lorraine in Birmingham. Hi, Ollie. I am a complete cynic about politics, justice and integrity in this country. It doesn't exist. The people who show courage and integrity are those like Alan Bates. I guess that's the point I'm sort of trying to hit on, Lorraine, is that if you were to take this scandal in isolation and think about which of those individuals, displays the characteristics which we would look upon favourably, displays the characteristics that you would praise, you'd say it was him. And you'd probably say it was actually most of those sub-postmasters. And yet, they're the ones who are suffering. And I think that speaks to, very distinctly, very simply and very clearly, power and class dynamics in this country. She adds, Fujitsu should foot the bill, plus the post office, and those who are complacent, such as MPs. This is the thing with the Fujitsu line, though, Lorraine. I mentioned to you that story earlier from the Financial Times. Billions in solo and joint public sector contracts since the December 2019 ruling. So if they're the ones that are paying, we're still technically contributing to that. The taxpayer still has a role to play in that. So even if we do go to Fujitsu, and I think probably rightly so, You know, the people who provided the Horizon IT system, which is the IT system at the heart of this miscarriage of justice, they're technically the ones who should be responsible. But it still would end up being your money that's contributing to it. 0345 6060 973 is the number to call if you want to join this conversation. What does justice look like? What should we be doing about it? And most particularly, who should be footing the bill? You and me? One of the private companies involved. 150 government contracts since the scandal broke. 22 million last year in profit for Fujitsu. 1.3 billion in revenue. That can't stand, can it? Shouldn't be up to us. You're listening to LBC with me, Ollie Dugmore. Like I said, number to call, 0345 6060 973. The time now is 1:45.
This is LBC.
Do you like the sound of a KFC mini fillet burger, small popcorn chicken and fries for just $2.99? Of course you do. So let's make this official. Let's shake on it. That's the bonus variety deal for just $2.99. Do the deal until the 4th of Feb. Only at KFC.
Participating restaurants only. T's and C's apply.
Think January is bad in the UK? Here in Sweden, we get 4 hours of daylight and temperatures of -17. That's why, in January, we make things a little easier. So when you choose a Volvo XC40, you get a £4,000 contribution plus 0% APR. Pretty sure I remembered everything.
Anna, could you let me in? It's freezing out here.
Nearly everything. Order online or visit a Volvo retailer today.
50% minimum deposit, £4,000 contributed by Volvo. Finance provided by Volvo Car Financial Services UK Limited. Figure based on XC40 mild hybrid and varies by model. Terms apply.
Hi all.
Hiya.
How are we doing?
Afternoon.
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 Let's get this meeting. Meeting.
Meeting started.
Hi, Mom.
Where's the tablet gone?
When everyone's home, EE Work Mode prioritizes your broadband for working from home with the UK's fastest major broadband provider. So...
Yeah, I've got you loud and clear as a bell.
This is broadband made for working from home. Search EE Broadband, powered